We happened, Emily and Alice, we met at Reading Terminal yesterday. We wanted to go over some things from Black Reconstruction. And while we were sitting there, we saw Ransom, whom I know mainly from seeing at all of the most important jazz concerts. And and I already knew this, but I didn't know the depth of it. He is really an expert in jazz. And you all have heard me say this before, how much the avant-garde means to me, and how I hear the avant-garde. A lot of people just hear noise when they hear it, but I hear it. In fact, I can hear Cecil Taylor better than I hear Oscar Peterson. And I love Oscar Peterson, the classical kind of jazz. But when I hear Cecil Taylor or Ornette, or we could name a lot of people. So I don't know, Nuri, did y'all remember seeing him when we were at the oh, they remember seeing it.
Yeah. Concert,
yeah. And it's so interesting, Ransom. Nuri had just gotten back from Korea.
Wow.
Visiting her family over the holidays. And, it's long air flight back. So she didn't want to come. So Jeremiah can, no, come. And when she came, and, because Seoul, South Korea is a much more orderly and cleaner city than this. So when you come back into this country, you got to get your mind set for, all of the dirt and bullshit. I don't know that they have homelessness in Seoul, do they?
They do, but not to this degree.
Not to this degree. So we were sitting there before the second night, because, we were there because I wanted to hear the two drummers, but it only was one.
Oh, yeah. I had to actually voice my displeasure.
Yeah.
And that drummer they going to have Ebo.
Ebo.
Oh, my God.
Shit. But anyway, when we come back to that in a minute. So me and Nuri, I'm sitting next to Nuri, and she's, just, chit chat before things got started. And she, she's not, she's still a little jet lagged. When the music began, a smile came on her face that never left it for the entire concert. And she said to me, they call me Doc, but that's all right. I'm trying to get out of that. I'm locked in the closet with Doc. I can't be anything. But anyway, she said, Doc, she said, I know why I'm so glad to be back in the United States. Because, and it is true, and Ransom said this to us yesterday when we were talking, this contribution to world civilization is irreplaceable. But I just wanted to introduce you to him. It's so good. And while we were sitting there, I think Emily brought out her copy of Black Reconstruction, and he immediately said, that's my favorite book.
Wow.
I had no idea. We never talk like this, even though we've seen. And
now, in my opinion, this is the baddest thing he wrote. Now, I'm saying my opinion because I'm dignifying somebody else to have another.
But I'm gonna tell you now, the way he
when
talks,
I read this, I said, "Whoa!"
You see the way he talks and acts. You know who? And I told him this. He acts and talks just like Amiri Baraka, the great. Yeah, he does. Check him out, and you'll see. And he said, "Yeah, that's one of my favorite people."
I had the opportunity right before he died. Real quick, I had the opportunity to kind of hobnob with him because he fanatically turned up and he performed his poetry along with live music at the New York Vision Festival. And he's very, very, I love brilliant people that are very down to earth and very accessible, that don't
Put on
intellectual
airs.
arrogance turns my stomach. I hate it. don't
Yeah.
hate too many things. But,
Yeah.
you know, he's
Yeah.
a real cool guy. I fanatically do not collect autographs because I feel that the artists, I thoroughly appreciate what they do for us, but what they're doing actually is providing a special mirror, and the energy that you are experiencing is actually your own energy reflected back to you. But most people don't know it, and they're giving the artist. That's why Miles would not let you put him.
Yeah.
He knew he didn't belong. You know what I mean? So, but I was sitting right beside him, and I had bought his latest musical criticism book.
Yeah.
Well, ain't radical like the ones that we know about,
Mhm.
like
Mm-hmm.
tone,
Mm-hmm.
But I said, I wonder if I can get your autograph, and I was glad I did because he died a couple of years after that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I got a chance to have him. He's real regular. I loved it.
Yeah, Amiri Baraka,
Yeah.
one of the most brilliant, and in fact, I consider him to be the greatest analyst and critic of jazz.
I totally agree.
See, because if you go back to the 40s and 50s and 60s, and even up till today, that field of jazz criticism, the majority of the musicians are black, and the overwhelming majority of the critics are white, and they took attitude many times.
Right.
If it didn't fit with, and
Right.
Amiri shut that down
Oh, yeah.
and established that black critics are the best ones to explain this music.
Exactly.
And he, but before, so I think I've introduced everybody to Ransom. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
I know we're surprised that you're here. We didn't know that you would come. And so we're going to continue with the chapter, the general strike. And then we're going to try to segue into the chapter on the black proletariat in South Carolina. If we do nothing else, perhaps we will tease out the meaning of the footnote. Shaolin, do y'all have a copy of the book? Well, we'll find a way to share it.
Oh, I just want to just let everybody know that I have vision issues.
Yeah, don't
in my
worry.
days of doing serious reading, but I have my magnifying glass. I have limited vision in one eye, and this eye would be good if I would change my glasses, which I need to do. But I have my magnifying glass, and I'm going to get into the fun.
Yeah, that's what Alice told him. Yeah, well, you can bring your magnifying. Oh, Emily told you can bring your magnifying.
There's nothing wrong with that.
And just a quick thing, Ransom. We consider ourselves to be what Martin Luther King called the world house. We're multi-civilizational here, and we respect all of the civilizations of the world, but in particular of the darker races. And we find a point of commonality in the anti-colonial struggle and in the struggle for Black freedom.
Right.
And this is why Du Bois is so important to us. So.
Oh, I'd like to say something right
go
there.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Because I'm really with that. Then let me break it down to what I'm saying. I have found that it's not about quote unquote racism. However, it is about, and I'll say this twice. I stole this from the brother that I'm going to actually see, this musician, El Zabar. I always mess his name up.
What's his name?
He's gonna be El Zabar.
Oh,
Khalil El Zabar.
Oh, so
And he's gonna be.
I know who that, yeah.
Arsenal was bringing him in. I bought tickets for both nights. And Craig Bale was going. Well, anyway, I stole this concept from them. I went to see him in the early '80s at the Middle East Jazz Club. It doesn't exist anymore. Well, he said, now I'm noticing. He said in between the song, he said, I'm noticing that the majority of people that have attended this concert are Caucasian. He said, we are very, very grateful that you understand and appreciate and love our music. And he said, it's not about racism. but it is about ethnic heritage, cultural imperative. Now, how does this work? This means that you can be founded or grounded in your culture and then thoroughly appreciate and understand the validity of world culture. You know what I'm saying? So that's really where I'm at with that.
No question. And in fact, anybody that considers themselves a genuine intellectual, and certainly a revolutionary intellectual, has to proceed from that worldview. And we're here deeply committed to that worldview. So yeah, I'm telling you, Ransom, you'll find this will be a home for you. These are some of the best people, some of the smartest people. I'm not even going to run down the degrees in here because then I got to get myself up off the floor.
And when I go to the concert, I'm going to actually pull the brother to the side. I'm going to tell him I stole his concept.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell him that I thoroughly, because what it did is frame.
So let me just
how I felt.
Yeah, no question. But anyway, this will be a home for you, hopefully. I think being here, you already see that you made friends already, even though you might not realize it. This is a place of people who are very loyal to one another and to great ideas. And if we have nothing else, that is us, we are wealthy in human capital. We might not have physical capital, but the development of the human mind, the human spirit. And this is why this is such an extraordinary experience for me to be a part of all of these people. So without going any further on that tip, because
He played with Nina Simone, Farrah Sanders, and Archie Shepp.
Say that again. What did you say?
Oh, the musician you were bringing up.
And Ars Nova, yeah.
Yeah.
I always mess his name up.
It's Kahil. Kahil. How do you say that?
Khalil El-Zabbar?
Yeah, Kahil
Yeah.
El-Zabbar.
Yeah. I always, for some reason, his name, and I don't like to.
That's okay.
I like to pronounce a person's name correctly or whatever.
Yeah.
But just before we get to our reading of Black Reconstruction, just a few quick things about the world political situation. The Biden administration, as I think everybody is aware, is the most dangerous administration in the history of the United States. Completely committed to war, even if it means nuclear war. They are losing and will lose in Ukraine. They're losing and are now, with this corrupt Ukrainian government, are sending all of these tanks and talking about F-16 fighter jets, and even talking about maybe getting NATO involved in a war with Russia. And then while they're doing that, other generals are saying that we're only 2 or 3 years away from war with China. So this kind of thinking, I don't recall ever in my lifetime, throughout the entire Cold War, never has an administration gone this far. So we are in what they call an inflection point. And how we come out of this will be very important to the future of humanity. And I think I won't go in, unless other people can go into details, but I just wanted to make one point. The question of peace is the overriding human question. It is more important than, and I put this in quotes, the class conflict narrowly conceived. It is more important than the environment, the green movement. It is the overriding human question, because without peace, humanity cannot move forward. So I just wanted to say that this in no way takes away from or diminishes the study of Du Bois.
Yes.
As you know, as we all know, Du Bois is probably one of the great fighters for peace in the history of the United States. And of course, he was imprisoned, his passport was taken, and so on because of that. And I would say that in the free school, it's like we're following in the path, in the footsteps of W.E.B. Du Bois. And this is very important, the spirit and the substance of his life, of his politics, of his spirit, of his morality, you know. So I'll just shut up. Anybody else want to say anything about this?
Well, I think, yeah, I also saw there was a headline that said, who was it? It was one of the generals of the U.S. Army who said, but based on the whole China balloon thing, like that,
Oh, yeah.
there was a Chinese weather balloon that
Oh yeah.
like wandered into U.S. airspace. Like, and it started off in Alaska and made its little way down because of the polar vortex we're experiencing right now. And the U.S. government, they even canceled their trip to Beijing that was supposed to happen this week because they were accusing that weather balloon of being a spy balloon.
Yeah, they have been.
Yeah, and there was a headline saying that there was a memo that NBC News obtained from a general, like a high-up general in the U.S. Army, who sent it to his like sub-generals or whatever the structure is, saying that we have to be prepared for. He was like, if I had to give an estimate, I would predict we're going to go to war with China by 2025. He gave that estimate. And like, I've been calling my dad every night this week, and he told me it's like the number one topic he talks to me about. It was like, did you hear what they're saying about China today? Did you hear what they're saying about China today? And for my dad, it's the number one, like, there's nothing else he can talk about with me, where it's just like he's talking about war. He's like, there's something happening and we have to keep our eyes on. He was like one day he'll say, did you hear about the new sanctions that they're putting on Chinese companies? He's like, are you hearing about this? And he's even trying to historically make sense of it, where my dad's like, because my dad is almost 70, and he was born in the late 50s. And yes, he was born in the late 50s, and he was telling me, he's like, this reminds me of during the Cold War. He was like, it reminds me of China's relationship with the US. And he's like, why are we going backwards? Why does it feel like the US wants us to go backwards? And it made me also think about, I'm like, there has to be a lot of American people who can feel, even if they don't see the headlines, they know there's war. You know, they're feeling the effects, the ripple effects of a war policy, a war agenda of this administration. And it's going beyond Russia and Ukraine, and it's heading towards China. And I don't know, I just wanted to emphasize what you said, Doc, that the question of peace is the overriding human question today. And in some ways, it's like, when I was rereading some passages from Black Reconstruction, I thought I did think about the question of war and peace. Because in some ways, Du Bois, I really think it means a lot that one of Du Bois's last works before he passed away was he wrote a manuscript that was never published because no publisher wanted to publish it. And it was called Russia and America. And Du Bois made it was almost like he was prophesizing the central question that the whole world would have to grapple with, which is the question of peace. Where Du Bois said in Russia and America, in some ways he was making the point, like, America and Russia, who was posed as the enemy, and when Du Bois was writing the manuscript, we have everything to learn from each other, but actually we have shared traditions, a shared revolutionary tradition, where our people want to march forward to ultimate democracy. And in some ways, I feel like we're seeing something today too, where it's like there's a forward march of humanity toward ultimate democracy. And there's something the US, like this ruling class administration, whatever you want to call it, they don't want to let the people go. And it's like,
That's interesting.
and the American people, it's like, I feel like I'm watching, the movement of people in this country, what they're saying and stuff, because I want to know how much are the people feeling like, yes, let us go. Like, when are you going to let us go? Let us move forward.
Mhm.
So I just wanted to say that because, yeah, my dad, it's interesting. That's all my dad can talk about is war, war, war. Like, when is war happening? War.
Yeah, just to
Okay, go
add,
for it, Jerry.
I think, yeah, like the whole Chinese balloon thing has been very interesting,
Mhm.
partially because I don't know if people saw it, like a few nights ago, Tucker Carlson had on this YouTuber comedian guy, Jimmy Dore, to talk about basically Tucker let this guy on to go on like a 4-minute rant about how the real enemy of the American people is not China or Russia, but is actually the military-industrial complex. And yeah, I think that because apparently it turned out that the Pentagon knew about this balloon
Yes.
for a long time, and so basically, like people are speculating that they needed a reason to cancel the talks between Tony Blinken, and the Chinese foreign ministry in China. And so they were just like, oh, we can just use this balloon as an excuse. But I think what I am concerned about and worried about is that there is, especially whether it's like, I think especially amongst Trump people, there is a deep-seated suspicion of China. And I think that is one of the things that I'm the most worried about, because it's like they basically view the Biden administration as being almost like owned by China. And they basically think that the Biden administration is infiltrated by the CPC and all these things. And it's like, I think instances like this, it's like you can see even in the singular figure of someone like Tucker Carlson, you can see him being basically like swayed in different directions, where he's like, oh, like I hate China, but I don't want to go to war with China.
Right.
But then this China balloon thing happens. He's like what are they going to do? Like it's like there's this perception that because like the Pentagon knew that this balloon existed, and because we also assume that it's like a spy balloon, they're like, oh, this is further evidence of just how much the government under the Biden administration is controlled by China, or like is friendly to China, and they secretly want China to come in and destroy America, like all of these narratives and stuff. And I think that's also what I'm really concerned about is like, as the American people are trying to make sense of what's happening in the world and what their place will be in the world, it's like you can feel people being like almost like buffeted around in certain directions. But yeah, I think especially people like that, I think it was like a US Air Force general who, as Emily mentioned, said like, oh, like we need to be ready for war with China by 2025. It's like it's like even especially amongst like the military establishment too, there is this feeling that Biden is too soft on China.
Wow.
And I feel like it's very shocking, I think, for people like us to hear that, because like if you look at it objectively, we've never been closer to war with China, like ever. And so it's like, how can you say those things? But I think that there is a feeling, and it overlaps to some degree with the Trump movement, that basically, that Biden is too soft on China, and like there is a tendency towards basically war in that kind of mindset. And I think that this is something that we need to be aware of. But even in terms of, because I know in the upcoming Du Bois event happening this month, that we'll be talking about the Trump movement, and I think the question of war and peace, but especially in terms of China, because I think that my feeling is that like Trump people are not really down with the Russia-Ukraine war or the U.S. government's role in the Russia-Ukraine war, but I think that they're not really decided about this issue of China. And so I think that this is something that will be important to keep our eyes on for sure.
Go ahead, Samir.
The weather balloon incident reminded me of the reports, mostly from Cuba, but also around the world, where CIA officers were reporting being attacked by sonic weapons, and they collected all the evidence they could, and all they could found was the chirping of tropical crickets. They would go to the doctor complaining of nausea and headaches, and the most powerful intelligence organization in the world could not present more than just this recording of crickets that they claimed was a sonic weapon that was causing these officers to miss work and have headaches. And anyway, it all reminds me of and I've been listening to this podcast Blowback, and I went back to the first season, which talks about the Iraq War, and I've been thinking a lot about George Bush and all the paranoia that he whipped up intentionally, and some of it like not very honestly. Donald Rumsfeld accused in 1993 when the Oklahoma Trade Center was bombed. I think he said immediately it was Saddam Hussein or it was Al Qaeda or some Middle Eastern terrorist, and it turned out to be Timothy McVeigh. If I have my facts correct, but it just goes to show that the right wing in this country has this intense feeling of paranoia and suspicion that even though there's no enemy, it has to be direct. This energy has to be directed to a new other, and we just keep trading out others. Now that it's no longer the 1990s, the Russians can't be the bad guys, the Middle Eastern terrorists can't be the bad guys. Now we're moving on to bigger and badder bad guys like China. I guess the problem with this intense paranoia is there's no room for a critical look at it to say, actually, none of this decision is based in rational thought. It's all paranoia, he said, she said, name calling, and that's how decisions are made at the highest level of this country. And it prevents the country from, like Emily said, moving forward, and possibly in the first Cold War prevented the U.S. and Russia from cooperating to create a peace dividend, a more peaceful world, and racing to the stars that could have been done cooperatively. So when I'm thinking about the new Cold War and all the opportunities that will be missed in AI or quantum computing and all the cooperation, and the difference between this Cold War and the last Cold War is the last Cold War was between two separate economic blocks, but this Cold War, the economic blocks are already together and they're coming apart.
Why do you say they're coming apart? I mean, maybe the Western economic bloc. What about?
Yeah, I mean,
like they're splitting.
they're splitting apart.
Oh yes.
Yeah, that's good clarification.
Mhm.
It reminds me of the Peloponnesian War, the Greek historian Thucydides, who hasn't been talked about in the news, but was really popular 3-4 years ago in every article. And he said that when Athens and Sparta went to war, Athens was a naval power and Sparta was a land power. So he said that either the whale will learn to walk or the elephant will learn to swim. And the whale learned to walk. But in the Peloponnesian War, there are 2 Peloponnesian Wars, and even though Athens won the war, Athens collapsed because of the cost of the war, and neither Athens nor Sparta ever really recovered. And I think it led to either Persia or northern Macedonia and Alexander the Great taking over Greece, leaving both weakened.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Well, I listen to Tucker Carlson and others, and hello, Eddie.
Welcome back.
And really, what he's doing is setting up his listeners for a big disillusionment, because there is not, the quote, first Cold War ended when Gorbachev undermined the Soviet Union and the system that they had. And we can go, that's my opinion. It was not just the natural course of a system that was unworkable, as the West tries to claim. But the Soviet Union was always weaker than the United States. It was decimated by World War II, and it started out from a weaker place. Where Russia started out after its revolution was comparable to where China started out after its revolution. None of these revolutions start with a lot of wealth and everything. So everything has to be rebuilt and agriculture has to be reorganized. But after World War II, the United States and the West were enormously more powerful than the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union, however, equaled the West in terms of its human capital. That's why they were the first to put a satellite in space, manned space travel, and a lot of other things. So human capital was equal, and maybe the Soviet Union a little bit above the United States, especially in fields like theoretical physics, and a lot of their stuff has been put under the rug. I won't get into that yet. Philosophy, of course, their long history in literature and music and art is enormous, and this is all human capital. But the United States was still, especially at that time, to be this kind of, people saw it as just a special place because of the wealth, the white middle class, yada, 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 yada. All that's over. China is not the Soviet Union. China is not only the equivalent of the United States and the rest of the West in terms of technology and infrastructure. I mean, please, there's no comparison. But the human capital is much higher in China than the United States. And they can rail about an economic war. And Tucker doesn't want a physical war with China. At least he has that much sense. The United States could not win a war with China in the South China Sea or around Taiwan or any of that. They would lose and such. But they can rhetorically go to war with China and propose an economic war, which the United States would lose as well. And, there is no win. The only win is to back off of the policies of war and belligerency and adopt policies of what was at one time called peaceful coexistence. Right. That every nation, every people have a right to develop along their own path. If the Chinese choose their government headed by the Communist Party, that is the choice of their people, not the choice of the American ruling elite. But it's a no-win situation. And of course, there is a problem of white supremacy, of white people not being able, or elites at least, not being willing or able to accept that Asia is rising, Europe is in relative decline. Now, Europe doesn't have to collapse or go back into a dark age. It has to cooperate. And it no longer can war be the answer, because the West can't win a war, and in a nuclear war, nobody wins.
Right.
Can't
use it.
And then, of course, the multipolar world. But I just want to bring all of that up. But all of that should not make us be less vigilant in the fight for peace. If I could just say one small other thing. What goes for the peace movement in the United States is, in any reckoning, is not a real peace movement. It's not organic. It is not rooted in the people. It is ideologically confused. I don't know. Did anybody see the? I think Catherine sent it out. The statement of the U.S. Peace Council on the situation. Did you see it, Jerry?
I didn't.
Yeah, I did read it. It's not good reading, by the way. They can use your editorial and writing skills, Jerry, but it's politically amateurish, silly.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? People who are claiming one thing, but are unable to rise to the level in the details of their program. They make great claims, but they can't rise to the level of realization of those claims. Does that make sense? Because they're trying, as they say, to ride two horses going in opposite direction. One, you want to support the Biden administration. That's the subtext. You see what I'm saying? For example, they will correctly say and condemn Trump's administration's sanctions on Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba. Right. They'll say, and then they'll say, well, we're against the war in Ukraine. But they're not saying who provoked the war in Ukraine and who is creating the threats to China and Russia, which is the Biden administration. Why is that? Because the subtext of it all is that Trump is a fascist. And as bad as Biden is, Trump is worse. You see what I'm saying? That's so they can't fight for peace. You know, and they do not say anything about NATO. I don't think they even call for the dismantling of NATO. So I just say all of that to say everybody can say they're for peace, but very few people have the courage to fight for peace if it means opposing your own government and your own imperialism. And when I say your own, that means quotes, the imperialism that rules this country. You understand? You might, it's just like a person that got advanced lung cancer, and he goes to the doctor, and the doctor says, well, look at here, man, you got advanced lung cancer, but I want to treat your ingrown toenail. You know what I'm saying? I mean, so, yeah, I mean, my ingrown toenail is hurting, but I mean, I can't breathe, So, so this is what you get, Sheldon and Dave, this is what in street language we call nickel and dime espionage. I'll explain that. Yeah, it's a kind of, I want to be for peace, but I don't want to go up against the quote liberal wing of my own government, of my own ruling class, because I perceive the greater threat to be those who are against the war in Ukraine, who happen to be on the Republican right or the populist side of the Republican Party. And that's what we're going to have to navigate at the conference. Because now the other thing, just one other thing I wanted to say, on the fight for peace. I don't know if you all are following this or have seen this. There are a group of so-called leftists and progressives who have come together to support the quote Ukrainian government against Russian imperialism.
No, I didn't see
Has anybody seen that?
No.
How's that meaning?
You all haven't?
No, what the
Well, how could I see more than you all?
Well, the algorithm has advanced.
Oh, the algorithm has discriminated against y'all, but not me.
Yeah, for some reason.
Oh yeah, there.
Wait, what groups?
I forget. I just know some of the names.
Was it them Chomsky?
In fact, one of the names. Remember when the man came up and was talking to me from the Carpenters Union,
Yes.
and he said he wanted me to call him because he wanted to set up a discussion between myself and Bill Fletcher. Well, Bill Fletcher is one of the people. I don't know all of them off the top. Another guy named Eric Draitzer, who used to 10 years ago, he kind of was decent, but he went deep into a rat hole. Yeah. So just one almost. So the quote, left and progressives are so divided that they are unable to take united action against the Biden administration. Whereas the right, now this concept of the right don't work no more, because on this question of the war in Ukraine, there is this is inverted commas or quote unquote, there is a left-right alliance. In other words, just to give you names, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tulsi Gabbard and Glenn Greenwald and Matt Taibbi and Jimmy Dore, just a whole swath of people who are considered progressive and left are aligned with people like a Tucker Carlson, a Marjorie Taylor Greene. Now, the contradiction, and everybody's probably somewhat aware of this, Lindsey Graham in South Carolina is one of the big supporters of Trump for 2024. But Lindsey Graham and Trump could not be more unlike one another. So the question is, what game is being played, especially this guy, Lindsey Graham, who was a tool of the military-industrial complex.
Oh, shit.
Oh yeah, he's and he's stupid, you know. On top of it, oh, he's so dumb. But from our ancestral state, this is where our relatives are from, South Carolina. But in the absence, and so the Progressive Caucus in Congress, which is 100% probably Democrats, and the Congressional Black Caucus, which is supposed to be progressive, are all, or at least the progressives came out right before the midterm election and said, well, they wrote a letter to Biden and said, well, we should negotiate a way out of this war in Ukraine. And they shut them down with the quickness. I'll explain that to you. Shut them down. And we haven't heard a word from those Democratic Party progressives since then. What is your position on peace? Now, of course, the recently elected Republican candidate, now he's a senator from Ohio, has called for a very rigorous accounting for the $100 billion that the U.S. has sent to Ukraine. It's probably more than that, etc. So we're looking at an alliance that is not just unique to the United States, but the United States is critical because of the role of the U.S. government, but a similar type of left-right, so-called left, so-called right alliance on the question of peace in Germany. The party of the left and I don't know who of the AFD, is that? Yeah, etc. A kind of populist, anti-globalist alliance. Now with cats like Tucker, and here is the ideological trap that they fall into. You're against the globalists, the neoliberals, one world government, one world economy run from Wall Street and London and so on and so forth. One reserve currency, the dollar. And so at the end of the day, a small group of Americans and maybe some Europeans and then they bring in for window dressing an Asian here and African there, so it looks like we're diverse. But anyway, this being against this kind of globalization is then as though China is responsible for policies that emanated from the United States.
Mhm.
And just one small last thing. You see, in 72, when Kissinger and Nixon went to China, that was a period that began what we call a rapprochement. Two former enemies say, okay, let's find a way out of this. And you know, the negative side of it is that the Chinese had to say, along with Kissinger, that we have a common enemy in the Soviet Union. That was a terrible thing. But when Deng Xiaoping comes to power, there was space for China to develop. You know, and that's what happened. And they try to say, well, they stole our tech. Now, they didn't steal nothing. You understand what I'm saying? Everybody, and that's another trope of white supremacy, that white people, that people of color always stealing from them. And they ain't never stole from nobody. You know what I'm saying? You know,
Oh my God. You stole the country.
Yeah, right. Stole, 10 million people from Africa. But everybody's stealing from them now.
What?
But you know, it's such a visceral thing that people do not know how to address it. Now, with Jimmy Dore going on there and, kicking it hard, and then of course with Glenn Greenwald, with Tulsi Gabbard and those, they're consistent on the question of peace. If you're going to oppose the U.S. government in Ukraine, how can you not oppose them in the Taiwan Straits? Don't just nickel and dime people. I'll explain that to you. You can't, and that's what you said. You're playing with people, with the masses. But that's all I want to do. But Ransom, you had your hand up.
Oh yeah, I just want you to touch on the extreme white supremacist racist thing going on in the Ukraine with the skinheads. That is repulsive. And you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I don't think there's anything to say beyond what you said. I mean, people who look closely at the regime in Ukraine, they know that behind this Jewish Russian speaker, Zelensky, are hardcore Nazis.
Yeah.
And not neo-Nazis, hardcore Nazis that are responsible for the murders and deaths of millions of Ukrainians during World War II, including Ukrainian Jews from Odessa in particular. So here you have, and so they were always saying to us, well, how can the Ukrainian government be a pro-fascist government when they got a Jewish president? Well, I mean, just so you all know, in Poland during the German occupation, in Warsaw and other cities, there was a ghetto, which was a Jewish ghetto. And it was administered by what was known as a Judenrat. That sounds like a slick name, don't it, man? Judenrat. But it's Juden meaning Jewish administration. And so Jews collaborated with the Nazis in administering the Warsaw ghetto. You know what I'm saying? So to say, well, this guy is Jewish, well, that doesn't mean anything.
Right.
The Israeli government for decades collaborated with the South African government, which openly declared itself, part of the legacy from Hitler.
Right.
So, I mean, this thing, I'm Jewish and therefore I could never, no. It's not genetic, it's ideological. But I just wanted to say that, but the myth makers, the propagandists, which are really myth makers, to call it propaganda kind of doesn't really get it. You know, that's why you see
Yeah.
in all social science today, they emphasize narrative. What is the narrative? They never say, well, what is the truth?
Yeah.
What is the narrative? And people who invent narratives are, in essence, what you could call myth makers. The whole propaganda around what's going on in Ukraine is, yes, propaganda, but it's a narrative, myth making. That's why, if I could just say just one small thing. When you read newspapers, this is not so much the case if you look at the Financial Times from Britain, but you look at American newspapers like the New York Times, these long articles. Most people can't read it. I have trouble. I mean, damn, I got to do something else besides read your article, and then have three people writing an article. But these long, because what are they doing? They're creating narrative.
Oh,
You see what I'm saying? It's narrative. So people would say, well, you're giving me talking points. It's more than talking points. It is an interconnected narrative. You say, well, that's not true. And they'll say to you, well, this is my truth. You see what I'm saying? Because narrative is when you create a narrative, you're creating a set of beliefs. So it's not about the truth. It's like a person who is into, I was going to say certain religions, where you say, well, I don't think that's scientifically accurate. Well, I don't care because this is what I believe.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Etc. So we're now in this thing where to control people, it's not just enough to tell them lies. You must create a narrative. And that's part of the problem that we find with the so-called progressives and left, that they privilege the narrative of the ruling elite over the truth. You see what I'm saying? So that's kind of what we're faced with these days. And it kind of makes it difficult because narrative storytelling has a seductiveness that straight up journalism would not have. You could see it on cable news. I know you don't look at television, which is a good thing, Ransom.
No, I haven't owned one since 1990.
Yeah. And
I was 35, and I watched it for 35 years.
Yeah.
I'm gonna remember commercials from the 60s forever.
Yeah.
I wonder where the yellow went when I pressed my teeth.
Yeah.
It means nothing. It's
Yeah,
there
he's
forever.
talking about the commercials. It's a whole different world back then. But if you look at cable news, and you get, I look at Joy Reid a lot. Well, I'll tell you in a minute. Or others on, especially MSNBC, they're weaving mythologies and stories and what you should believe. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then you throw in there the whole thing of virtue signaling. If you don't believe what I believe, you are you're immoral. It's not only that you don't know the truth, or this is and that's why the whole question of the 2024 election, all of the politics right now, the way it is being narrated is as a moral struggle. And the prize is American democracy. But you see where I'm coming from. This is kind of what we're faced with. And let me shut my mouth. I'm talking too much as usual. But anybody else? Anything? Oh, go ahead, Caleb. I'm sorry.
I also had a question about the left, right, like realignment, because Glenn Greenwald had interesting comments some time ago. I don't remember if it was on his podcast or on Fox News, but But he talked about how he's been
Who
saying,
was this now?
Glenn Greenwald.
Glenn.
Yeah, how he said that he's been saying the same thing for like 10 years now, since like he got famous from the NSA league. But that, he got speaking gigs at MSNBC, CNN, but slowly that's been taken away, and that's why he's speaking on Fox News. Where it's not the things that he's saying is different, but like the whole landscape of like what is left and right has changed. And it's even interesting seeing like the response to the war, because like I was reading some articles about Germany, and it was like the AfD and the left party, how from like you can really trace it back also to East Germany too, and especially Germany being a big player in the war against Russia, where like them sending not just a couple of tanks but 100 tanks to support the Ukrainian war effort, that also being from Germany fighting against Russia. Like there's a whole history too, like drawn from that, where letting that memory still plays into it. It's not just this new war defending like national autonomy, but then like that whole crisis, I don't know, it's interesting because left and right becomes so in this stake now. Like what is left, what is right?
Yeah, right.
And I mean the left is technically in power in Germany. I guess the left is in power in America, but it's not. It's this sort of new thing happening where like what will this emergence mean for like the world stage?
So important what you just said. There is a realignment, and frankly, the politics of the United States will never go back to what it was before Trump.
Right.
Question is, how do we go forward?
Wow.
I know, if Trump runs as an independent, as a third party, uninhibited by having to go to people like Lindsey Graham, who are war hawks, or Mitch McConnell, who's a war hawk, or most of the Republicans in the Senate, probably most in the House of Representatives. If he runs as an independent, he can then run on a peace platform. And if he runs on a peace, like, in 2016, he ran on a no more intervention, no more wars of regime change, which then reversed what up to then was about 25 years of US policy since the first war against Iraq. So for him to say that, running against Hillary Clinton, who was for wars of intervention and regime change and supported the war, escalating the war in Syria by declaring a no-fly zone, which would have meant we were at war with Russia, who was an ally of the Syrian government. So Trump is a major player in U.S. politics. There's no two ways to get around it. Now some can say, well, I'm a purist of the left. I would never vote for or align with a Republican. That's not me talking. People will talk like that. But suppose the Republican opposes the immediate danger of all-out World War III.
Yeah.
I mean, is there such a thing as tactical alliances? If we can debate, for instance, they say, oh, we're against communism, oh, socialism, they talk all that shit day and night. But that's not the decisive issue. It's just like saying, I don't like oatmeal, and if you put it in front of me, I'm going to throw it back at you. Okay, but in the large scheme of things, the question is war and peace. So we can debate oatmeal, or whether or not, you like socialism or capitalism, or even whether you understand what they are. But war and peace, we understand each other. Let's fight together. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Well, yeah, just to add to what you're saying, I think part of the thing about the left-right alliance is that many people will accuse people like Glenn Greenwald of like the left-right alliance, but the subtext is that, or not often subtext, sometimes it's overt, but they're basically they'll say like fascism is the left-right alliance. Like the National Socialism represents like a left-right alliance. And so
Well, that's Horn.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
Yeah.
in that interview, I hope you don't mind me just
yeah.
Horn. I mean, and I know he knows what he's doing.
Right.
Refers to his
Yeah.
critics on the left as nationalist socialist.
Yeah.
Oh shit.
Am I right about
Yeah,
that?
that's
Yeah, so basically it's like,
And has said, could I just say one other? I'm sorry, Jerry. In the interview with a group of cats from Boston, he literally says, or actually says, not literally, actually says that to resolve the question of settler colonialism and Black oppression, there will have to be a major shock
Mhm.
to the international order, including nuclear war.
Woo!
Am I right about that? I heard that right, didn't I?
Yeah, he didn't say it like I really want nuclear war.
Right.
He's saying like, oh, if it's necessary, then that could help us overcome like U.S. imperialism.
Wait, who said that?
Gerald Ford.
Wow.
But yeah, I think exactly. But to the earlier point about like first of all, yeah, like what is fascism? Like that's a
Mhm.
whole other conversation,
Mhm.
which Du Bois helps to clarify because he actually went to Germany
Mhm.
several times and all that. But I think, yeah, I think people don't fully understand that, especially because so much of like this quote left-right alliance currently, whatever you call it, is centered around the war and peace question. That I think people also don't fully appreciate, like what someone like you boys would say, which is that it's not just that you're making like an alliance with someone just for the sake of it, but it's because in the struggle for peace, like relationships change, people change, and that is the hope ultimately. And we're not just doing this because we think it's a convenient thing, but we think that the fight for peace is important enough, but also transformative enough that it would create a space for like new relationships
Yes.
to emerge, for new frameworks of thinking to emerge, and that this can ultimately change people's minds as well, like about things which are beyond the peace question itself, but that this is a way for like people to come together in a new kind of relationship, and that this could hopefully help create like a kind of breakthrough in some ways.
Yeah.
But I think, yeah, even like, yeah, I was thinking about like the question of also like Ukraine and the neo-Nazi thing, and yeah, like I read this book recently called Stalingrad, which is about the Battle of Stalingrad during the Second World War, which Putin actually commemorated recently because it was like an anniversary of the.
Do you have access to that speech, by the way?
I thought Don DeBar shared it.
Okay.
I'm not sure if it's personal. But I think, yeah, like for Americans, it's kind of hard to appreciate the fact that Nazism, as it was formulated during, like especially during World War II, was an ideology specifically designed and sort of oriented towards like literally the colonization of Russia, of the Soviet Union, and of basically like the liquidation of like the Russian people. And like for Russia, it is like literally an existential issue, and for the United States and other Western governments to basically be covertly involved in the 2014 Maidan coup, which basically led to the overthrow of the Ukrainian government at the time, and then installing neo-Nazis in the Ukrainian government. It's like there's no way that you can see that except through the prism of your own history, in which Nazism was literally the force which almost led to the extinction of the Soviet state, but also basically of like the Soviet people and of like the Russian people. And it's like, yeah, you can say that, you know, like Russia took like a preemptive war against Ukraine, but it's not even so much about Ukraine as like, what do you, if you're Russia, like what do you do in the face of a government which is basically underpinned by an ideology which is specifically geared towards the extinction of Russia, like of the Russian state. And like what options do you have except to understand this through the lens of your own history? And like, are you just going to wait for the self-avowed Nazis to like come and take over, like come and basically try to like do what they did during the Second World War? And I think some of it is just partially it's just that Americans don't have the historical context of like what Russia and the Soviet people experienced during World War II. But I think having some appreciation for that history is also important. But I think basically I think we understand like whatever kind of alliance you call it in the United States, like the central thing is not that it's like a left-right alliance, but the central thing is that it's an alliance or an emerging alliance around the question of peace. And I feel like that's the important thing which gets left out. And that's why people like Gerald Horne will accuse us or anyone else of being like fascists, basically. But,
Oh, yes. You know, and I don't know if many people heard about the February 19th March in Washington for Peace. The Libertarian Party and the People's Party. But it seems that there'll be a lot of people who are normally not associated with the left or progressive movements speaking, I think, such as Steve Bannon and so.
Are you gonna go?
I don't know quite. I'm not quite certain yet. But all protests for peace are important, and it is the overriding all humanity question. Nothing unites humanity as such more than the fight for peace, and the forces of peace are stronger everywhere in the world. They're weakest here in the United, at least in the organized form. That doesn't mean that the people do not want peace. It's not yet organized. So anybody else? Okay, I guess I have to turn it over to Emily as we go into Black Reconstruction. Emily, let me just ask you this question. Can we, we're leaping, can we leap to the chapter on the Black proletariat in South Carolina? Do you mind?
Let me think.
I mean, you tell me.
Yeah,
because I know Bandung Reading Group has been paying, really a great deal of attention to Black Reconstruction. Maybe you can summarize the general strike chapter.
The price of disaster.
Oh, pardon me.
Yeah,
price of disaster. Forgive me. Yes.
The remaining part, if I had to summarize the remaining parts of the price of disaster, some of which are personally I do like, but it is it's basically it's where we left off last week, where like last week we discussed those like really nice pages where Du Bois defines Reconstruction as a revolution, and he explains his logic, and in some ways what he's doing is he's also giving the foundation of his science of the American revolutionary process, and where it also differs from classical Marxism. Like he's advancing, building upon Marx for the American situation, because it can't be easily compared to anything in the European situation where there's an aristocracy. And the remaining parts of the price of disaster go into him trying to like address the question of why did the white worker in the North and then the white poor in the South not unite with the Black proletariat, who they have common economic interests with. And so he talks about both the white poor in the South, and then he talks about in the North white labor, especially organized white labor, and he talks about labor unions, how the labor unions in the North, the white labor in the North, they simply did not understand the Black proletariat as a fellow worker, And they also did not understand that the Southern system, the Southern economic system, is totally different than the Northern economic system. The North based on industry, machines, factories, and the South, which is still a total agricultural system with a ruined ruling class, and thus it's economic disarray, disorganization. So yeah, and I guess just to summarize, like in terms of talking about the labor unions, I found it interesting because Du Bois makes it a point to say the problem is that the white labor unions, first of all, they didn't want to allow Black workers into their unions because they didn't see Black workers as fellow workers. And the second thing is also because they wanted to, like Du Bois has this nice line where he says, labor unions in the North, they wanted to just stick to being unions. They didn't want to be involved in the political struggle for democracy, which would have to involve taking the side of Negro suffrage. But for them, they were like, labor unions in the North were saying, our primary struggle is against the boss, is against the Northern capitalist, rather than saying having the greater vision that the Black proletariat had to have because they're emerging from a broken, like a now ruined plantation system, which is that there's a greater political democratic struggle, which has to involve like giving political, economic, and civil rights to not just Black labor in the South, but a poor, disinherited white labor in the South. So that completes the price of disaster. And I personally like this is just personal, but I just like the second half of the chapter because it also helped me understand, like, if you think about it, people's institutions today, like churches, labor unions, even elected office, they're the greatest and they represent the people the greatest in a time period where there's a much stronger political struggle for democracy in this country. Because I was looking through, like, the labor union I work for used to be part of the National Labor Union 1199, which I know that you were part of, Ransom.
Yes.
1190C. But, that was an actual radical union because I was flipping through this history book in the basement of my union office where the president at the time, Leon Davis.
Sorry about that. I should have hit something.
That's okay. The president of the National Union 1199 at the time, Leon Davis, every message he gave every month in the 1980s was a message about the primary question for our workers is the question of war and peace. And he says that, he's like, because this is a time period of the world communist movement, the world peace movement, the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr.
That's Ransom. It's on vibe right now. We're getting there.
And yeah, I just say that because I think Du Bois is saying, he's like, you can't, that's the problem. That actually is part of the downfall of Reconstruction. A union can't just be a union.
Right.
A union has to be part of the people's struggle, which is the struggle for democracy in this country. And then it's the same thing with churches, elected office, like it becomes just a symbol or a shell when you try to separate it from a people's struggle, a struggle for democracy. So that's the chapter, The Price of Disaster. And we can move on to.
Can I just say one
Yes.
thing, unless somebody else says? This is a very important thing. And, as we were talking in the past, each chapter could be a unique study in itself. And this chapter, and I was convinced listening to you, Emily, I think, I don't know what chapter you love the most now, whether it's chapter 9 or this one, but as a literary work, we see Du Bois as this great writer. To tell this story, this uniquely American story, this uniquely American revolutionary story, you have to have the literary talent of a Tolstoy or Dostoevsky or Victor Hugo, Les Miserables, where it is, and of course, we talk about narrative and the misuse of narrative, but this is narrative to centralize the human being in history. And so I mean, I think we learned so much about Du Bois and how the way he does history is so different. There are hardly any social scientists who are committed to science and reason and the truth as Du Bois is. But to convey all of that, he has to be able to write in a certain way, and he does it magnificently in this chapter. You know, unlike Eric Foner, me and Nuri talk about this. I mean, you don't want to read it because it's not written well. It's you know, the facts. I'm gonna give you the facts, and you know, but the facts, giving me the facts is not bringing me closer to the truth. And this is part of the I think undoing of Anglo-American philosophy. This idea that the facts themselves lead to the truth, or the facts themselves are the truth. If I can get the facts and present them in a certain way, this is what is true. And by the way, this is one of the great downfalls of Gerald Horne's work. You know, he is a what we would call in philosophy like a British empiricist. The facts. Look, I got the facts, and I'm going into archive. Then it turns out that he misuses archives, as so many academics do. And then historians that are, you know, technically able to uncover and you know, backtrack, say, well, no, you only quoted one half of what the person said. And if you did the rest of the quote, he would be saying the opposite of what you were saying, you know? So I just want, but go ahead, Ransom.
Yeah, I just wanted to hit real quick. The highest art of lying. You can actually use all facts, but you can present them in a way you know specifically what you have said, but you also know the impression that you make or what you made people think that you said, and the conclusion that you made them come to. But technically, what you said, what you're using are facts. That you actually can lie or have it have the effect of a lie. That's the highest art of lying. And that is so, wow.
Right.
It's amazing what you can do with language, good or bad.
Yeah.
You can really do things with language that is just, woo.
And see, the other thing about Du Bois, you know, it's so apparent as I guess you guys have been reading it, that he sets the bar so high for himself as a historian. It's like, you know, I have to do this in a way that few other human beings could. And to do it at that level, it required this not only his deep understanding of philosophy and methodology and history, but a profound literary sensibility. And I think that literary sensibility is not just writing well, but it's a certain empathy. Just like Baldwin. Baldwin is compelling because he empathizes with the human condition. And when we read Du Bois, there's that deep empathy, that reservoir that humanity counts that Black humanity counts. You don't get that in Foner.
No, well,
Oh, go ahead, Nuri.
Understand.
Speak up a little bit, please.
I think reading Eric Foner, it's like he has many facts, it's true, and he's trying his best to present them in a way that is like coherent, but he really lacks Du Bois's like overall framework. So the events that happen in history don't actually have a logic to them. It's more that they happen in confusing and chaotic ways, which I think is true of like, it is true that Reconstruction was a difficult era to understand and make sense of. But I think the thing is like Du Bois has his framework of like the Black worker, the white worker, the planter, the general strike, and that helps you to navigate like the rest of what happens like with the proletariat, the Black proletariat in South Carolina and like, the following chapters, which also are like difficult to read, but you have like an anchor in like the Black worker, and like you know that basically like they see certain things and they're trying to make sense of it and that they can. And I feel like Eric Foner sort of sees it through the lens of just like labor, but not like what labor actually means. And so it's almost like because he can't actually understand Black people or like what they're thinking. Because I think also what Du Bois, like a lot of where Du Bois's like most beautiful literary moments come is in like basically the life world of Black people. Like the thing about the ocean and the way that like Black people were like waiting and watching. Like yeah, Foner like completely lacks that.
Hello.
Hi. And like it's not even like necessarily his fault because he just doesn't have that perspective. But it's definitely very different.
This is so interesting what you said. You know, the question of categories, categories of knowledge.
Yeah.
You know, this is so important. And frankly, I often say historians that read Black Reconstruction don't know philosophy, and philosophers that read it don't know history, and none of them know sociology, you know. And all of this is very important because, you know, if you read the work properly, it's also a work of epistemology or theory of knowledge and of logic.
Yeah.
And so, as you say, he doesn't just start with the, excuse me, he doesn't just start with the Black worker,
Right.
but the Black worker is both a historically constituted reality and a category of knowledge. In other words, to understand everything that comes afterwards, including chapter 9, which we're going to go to today, you have to understand the epistemological framing that the Black worker is a category of knowledge. It is what Kant called the categorical imperative. You don't have to call it that, but it is a category of knowledge. In other words, unlike Foner, facts, and just, okay, you gave me the facts, you know, okay, good, I know facts. But he never establishes in his work what his theory of knowledge is, what his categories of knowing are. You know what I'm saying? And you know, if I just a quick thing, that's why in the chapter on the general strike, you know, you get all of these trivial statements. Oh, it wasn't a general strike, it was a wildcat strike. Or one woman, famous Indian professor, what's her name?
Arundhati Roy.
No, not Andhra. They came up to speak at Spivak. You know, she's going to prove that Du Bois's chapter on the general strike is complete. Well, this is 6 years ago. She hasn't proven it yet. But that it wasn't a general strike, that according to Rosa Luxemburg, who wrote on the general strike, you know, this would not be considered a general strike. So you get all of this trivial and superficial critique that does not understand the logic that produced that chapter. There's a logical, not just a logically it follows. I'm not talking about that kind of logic. Logic from the standpoint of a theory, how logic is embedded in theories of knowledge. That if I establish the centrality of the Black worker as a category of knowledge, then I have to look at the Black worker the way that social and historical science has looked at the modern proletariat period and its capabilities. Does that make sense? It's their capacity, the capacity of, and of course, he is taking the whole body of European radical thought, including Marx, the Communist Manifesto, all of that, and saying the modern proletariat is historically constituted, arising out of certain relations of production, and as such has these capacities. Okay? Take that. Everybody would, progressive writers would take that as bottom line. But Du Bois says if that is true for white working people, it is doubly true for the Black proletariat. Does that make sense? So it is he is one saying that from the standpoint of how we know the world, how the world is known. Let me get this straight now. Go on. Which is a theory of knowledge, a worldview even.
A worldview.
How we know the world makes imperative that we not know the world, i.e. working class and class struggle, as long as it's white. And then when you cross the color line, they just slaves.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? No, that is not his principal category of knowledge. He does not start with the first chapter, the slaves. It'd be a whole different book. It'd be about 1/3 the size. Think about it.
It would.
Yeah, you start with the first chapter, the slaves. The next chapter, the white poor. That the whole thing is fucked up from that point. But what he starts with is the universally acknowledged category of the proletariat. Then you write, now let's get busy and write this thing and research this thing. Hence, you get what you get from Du Bois. Everything follows. And hence, the price of disaster. Who is a disaster for? The working class.
Wow.
You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Oh, it's a beautiful architecture that he sets up. Beautiful. And it gives us not just the facts or details of American history, but the theory of knowledge necessary to understand American history. That's why you got to go philosophical, and he does. And look, historians don't know philosophy. American history, at least I haven't met one yet. I mean, Lord have mercy. I mean, I'm telling you the truth. Now I'm about ready to go on the verge of cursing and all that, but I won't. But the emptiness of American academic education, the superficiality of it. Oh, I'm a historian. Well, that's not enough, hometown. I got my PhD in history. And somebody said, well, so what? That means you can collect facts and present them in a way that the ruling establishment doesn't find offensive. Okay. But you don't know even what you're doing because you don't have a theory of knowledge. You don't know philosophy. And here I agree with Hegel. Philosophy is the science of sciences. It is the discipline that critically deals with questions of categories of thinking, categories of reasoning, categories of knowledge. You don't have that, you can't understand anything as complex as US history.
Yeah.
It's all bullshit, as we all know. So, and I here I have to say something about Gerald Horne's methodology. And it is not, because for most people, including myself, Gerald Horne is just, I mean, he's almost like a phenomenon. I don't know nobody that can go to archives and just hang out in archives the way he has done. You know, my colleague Dwight, he knows Gerald. I mean, it's a strange thing to be able to do that. There are people who have that skill, have that sensibility. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But how can I put? I wanted to make an analogy. You know, it's just like somebody that works on a construction site, and all that person does, he digs holes. You know, back in the days when Black people couldn't get jobs in the building trades, you walk in Philadelphia, you'd always see Black men down in the hole digging, and a white man standing up top. Y'all Negroes. I mean, you remember that?
I remember that.
When we were coming up, always digging the hole. They didn't have backhoes. No, you down there with a shovel. Now, every occupation has its limitations and its shortcomings. So if you're digging all the time, you're looking down. You don't get a sense of the totality. It is only if you have the right philosophical and methodological outlook that you can begin to see things in their totality. And that's what Du Bois gives us here. This is why this work, you know, people can say, well, it's a great work, but he didn't deal with the Native Americans. Now that's what you call a low blow, man. Oh, it's a great work, and it would have been a better work if it had dealt with settler colonialism. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's say for the sake of argument, let me give you that for the sake of argument, not because I agree, but for the sake of argument. Now let's deal with this book. And then after we deal with what is this book doing, then we can deal with your other issues. It's just like taking Karl Marx's Das Kapital and say, well, Karl Marx only dealt with the English factory system in the 19th century. Well, what the fuck else was he going to deal with? He's living in the 19th century and he's looking at the essence of capitalism. Well, no, yeah, he didn't deal with the queer people in the factory. You know what I'm saying? He failed at the level of identity politics. So I'm going to cancel him in the book and everything else. But what does the book establish as a scientific work? What does Black Reconstruction establish as a scientific work? And has it been surpassed? Or does it speak as strongly to the 21st century as it did to the 20th century? And that's the measure of a great work. Does it continue to explain complex realities, not without our creative intervention and reading and all that we do with it. But does it do that? Does it establish what we would call a worldview? Some people say an ideological positionality. Some would say a philosophical, methodological approach that explains more than the specific subject that is being addressed. I would argue it does. I think that's what Bandung has discovered in its reading. I think all of it. And everything else falls so short. It's like you read it, you say, are you serious? Do you realize that there was a book called Black Reconstruction that Du Bois even lived?
Yeah.
Did that mean anything? So some people say, well, no, I'm down with the 1619 project. Du Bois didn't get that. I'm saying the 1619 project. Now, how you going? It's just like, I could make up a lot of jokes. Okay, can I make up a joke?
Prove it.
Look, man. It's just like I could be into a lot of things like Harry Potter movies.
Go ahead.
Yes. Go ahead.
No, I'm not into it. I'm not into it. I've never seen a Harry Potter movie. I've never read the book, but I have a general sense of how it fits into the zeitgeist of our time.
Go ahead.
With my bad self.
Yes.
I'm liking
Okay,
chocolate.
but hold on. Shut up. But no, I could be into Harry Potter, deep into Harry Potter. And I could say, well, Harry Potter came out in the 80s and 90s, and it became a sensation, a phenomenon in literature and movies and everything else. So Kat might come to me and say, well, Dig, man, yeah, I heard that you have read War and Peace, you read, the Brothers Karamazov, Crime and Punishment, you do the Russian literary tradition.
Yeah.
But man, I'm gonna tell you to your face, you ain't really did nothing until you read Harry Potter. You know what I'm saying? It's like you up here, but you got to come all the way down to the mediocre to really deal with the complexity and the totality of things. You see what I'm saying? In other words, no matter how mediocre something is, if you ain't read it, you don't know what you're talking about. And I would say, well, hold it. I am grappling with, and this is what we are doing. I am grappling with a foundational work. And part of what we do here is, and this is why the recovery of Du Bois is indispensable to the understanding of American history and its possibilities. To reclaim a foundational work is more important than reading 1,000 Harry Potter's or other books on like Reconstruction. Most of it is trivial, written by mediocre people whose intent often, or more than not to achieve new knowledge or truth, but their own fame. You ever hear people, have you read I wrote this book? Well, first of all, y'all writing too many books. Too many books. Can't nobody write no 2 and 3 books a year and do it right. You know what I'm saying? So it is to establish something about it's it's modern day what we call branding.
That is branding.
It's not what the academic or the intellectual was associated with if you went back to the Enlightenment and how that developed and on and on and on. People wrote books because those books needed to be written. And they had a certain capacity to do it. Today, academics write books, not because those books need to be written. Most of them don't. You know, and it's a waste of trees, tell you the truth. But it's a branding thing. And that's why, you know, every academic and intellectual now has to have a very strong social media presence.
Yeah.
You know, and then it's not just a social media presence, but me celebrating myself. Oh, look at this, just like a cat, you know, that goes to the gym and builds up muscles and takes steroids, come out in the summer with a little skimp. The cats kill me with them Look, Jack, you can have all of them, but why you got that skimpy shit on, man? With your behind now. You ever dig it? Oh, you don't watch it. No. Oh,
You see them outside.
Huh?
They be outside in the summer.
I know they be
With
out.
the tank tops and they be showing the pecs.
No, but I'm talking about
He's
the
talking about
cats.
Speedos.
I'm talking about
Are you
the
talking about that?
Oh,
He's
it
talking
done
about
got.
Speedos.
So it's not about, okay, if it's just about health, oh, I'm a healthy looking person. If it's just, you know, or social, I mean, what they call it?
Capital, social capital.
No, not social capital.
Social
What they call it when they,
Influencing.
no, I'm not, wait, hold on. You know, when a person go to the gym all the time, self-care.
That's self-care.
No, that's what I'm saying. Look, if I'm walking around with big muscles,
Well, you know that's self-care.
and you know, the assumption is that, well, since you got big muscles and you in the gym all the time, you must be healthy. Yeah. Now it turned out that they're not healthy.
Right.
That they're the opposite of healthy, because I'm into boxing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you get a cat with a lot of muscles, they come out for the first round, they look beautiful.
Yeah.
Wow.
You know, all greased up and, you know, doing their thing. But, yeah, and it attracts a lot of women to it. Yeah, to boxing, that are not interested in boxing, but interested in seeing cats with muscles. Or as they say, an 8-pack. They go from a 6-pack to an 8-pack. So,
Okay, go.
okay, if Michelle will let me continue to make my point. But so what appears to be X, Y, and Z? I appear to be healthy. I appear to be smart. Look at the people who are saying that I'm smart. Look at the people who are celebrating me on Facebook or Twitter. Or seldom do they mention that I'm the main celebrant of myself. You know, but anyway, my point is that the academic is now a celebrity and is more interested in his or her brand than the truth. And it's everywhere. You know, at one time, you couldn't open a newspaper or a magazine or listen to any academic discussion on YouTube without hearing the name Ibram X. Kendi.
Gosh.
When was the last time you heard his name? Yeah, he did a talk at Temple. And, you know, but when was the last time you didn't, you know, he's gone. Now you can't turn on YouTube or anything without Gerald Horne. And now Hulu, you know, which is a streaming service, has a whole 6-part documentary on the 1619 Project, which is based upon Gerald Horne's counter-revolution of 1776. So you're saying, well, whoa. Hulu is the ruling class, is HBO and so on. Okay. Now, why and when did Hulu become so interested in Black liberation? Well, they said with the Black Lives Matter movement 2 years ago. Oh, y'all just got in the game, but yet you are determining what the truth or untruth is. But, and this is the key, and I'm going to shut my mouth here. Why is it in all the references of the 1619 Project, now they may have changed because they're always shifting on this, I don't think once they reference Du Bois's Black Reconstruction in America. Question is why that choice was made. Was it his, that it did not fit a liberal, ruling elite position? Did Du Bois establish too much truth when he talked about, well, you know, I won't go into it, but you see the point. You see the point. But so this, all right, let me shut up, man. But I would say, if I could just say one thing, Emily, we had talked about on the first page of the chapter, the footnote, which, I'm sorry, Jerry, you had your hand up. I didn't hear.
Kathy,
Oh, Kathy, I'm sorry. Forgive me.
Okay, my question was basically, I'm not philosophically trained, and so part of me is just, part of the struggle is to understand even what a category of knowledge is.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I'm
and
sorry.
like why
Forgive
it's
me
important. No,
yeah.
but I'm trying to, I guess, reason through it, but is it, I guess my rudimentary understanding of like what we mean by a category of knowledge is partially like what are the basically conditions of like human possibility in some ways. And I don't know. I guess I'm still trying to work out like what we mean by category of knowledge, because there's a way that you can interpret Black Reconstruction and those first two chapters as they are principally sociological categories. There's a way that you can interpret it that way. And I think many people do just interpret it as like economical categories. Right. And actually, I think Danny raised the question last week about like, why are we talking about the Black, like, is talking about the Black worker today a way of almost insisting on still the existence of the color line amongst the American working class? And I think I was like trying to make sense of that question, but I feel like that's only if you think about the Black worker as primarily or only a sociological category, as opposed to what you've been saying, like a category of knowledge, which I'm still trying to understand. It's both.
It's all of that. Yeah,
it's like both. It's all of that. But I guess so much of like this book, Black Reconstruction, is basically trying to explore like the total capacity of the American people towards like democracy.
Can I just say one thing? Yeah, I mean, I apologize to Sade and I apologize to you, Jerry, and to everybody. You know, I'm using these terms, and I'm not. Forgive me for not defining them better. You see, a category can function multiple ways within a body of work, a single work, let us say. So you're right. Now, as is in talking about the Black worker, are we talking about a product of the color line? And hence, to talk about the Black worker, does it assert a permanence for the color line? And of course, the free school is saying it is not permanent. It is, it is an instrument of the ruling class, as Du Bois talks about it. But see, there's the other thing. See, is, the question of a product of and it functions as, that's one thing, which is more socioeconomic, sociological. But then there is in philosophical, and really Hegel's philosophy, the concept of historically constituted, emerging out of history and historical situations. The Black worker is indeed the product of slavery, right? But slavery is both a product of and a foundation of modern capitalism. Hence, one can say that the Black worker is historically constituted. It emerges from complex historical processes. This is why, another concept is the concept of emergence. We're talking about the concept totality, looking at things in their wholes, not just in their parts. You know what I'm saying? So all this, is important. These concepts, you can call them categories too, of knowledge, totalities. That's a category of knowledge,
Yeah.
Everybody doesn't look at things that way. Philosophically, are opposed to that. They are philosophical. If you take a person like Bertrand Russell, great philosopher, great piece, great progressive, all that kind of shit. He rejects the concept of seeing things through totalities for philosophical and logical reasons, which we don't have to get into now. But just briefly, that things are better understood in their parts.
Yeah. That's a good thing.
You know what I'm saying? That's a logical standpoint. But when we use the word epistemology, we're talking basically about what is called theories of knowledge. What we can know, and then when you put methodology on that, how we know. Very complex situation. You could get, people have gotten punched in the mouth back in the days over these questions. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't just a lot of cats saying, Rene Descartes, and I think like, no, man, you disagree. Let's go outside and have a duel, over this. So these are very important questions in the grand scheme of knowledge. But epistemology, the study of how we know, the theories of how we know. You understand what I'm saying? Now, if we approach Black Reconstruction and try to say, well, what is its epistemology? We have to ask the question, what are Du Bois's categories of knowledge? You see what I'm saying? You're coming at it, first of all, more seriously than some bullshit. Excuse my language. He said it and I read this page and get the fuck out of here. It's deeper than that. You know what I'm saying? It's just like somebody go to see a Sun Ra concert. Oh, they wasn't playing nothing serious. Look, they had on costumes and they was marching around. Then the person that know what Sun Ra is doing said, well, hold it, dog. It's deeper than that. And it is with Black Reconstruction. To understand why he starts with the Black worker, you have to understand how the category of the Black worker functions in Du Bois's theory of knowing American history. What separates? I'm talking too fucking loud. Excuse me. I'm gonna set up a storefront church next summer. But
Yeah, well, you're speaking dramatically, but you want to just make it clear that you're not angry.
I'm not angry.
And I have to stop that. I have to really check myself too, and I have to let people know I'm not angry. I speak.
Yeah, but
Vigorous.
you said that you have a monster within you that you control. But let's not get to that right now. But I got one of them too. I don't know whether I control it. But why he begins where he begins. Why here? Nobody else, never in writing American history begins with the Black worker. Why did he start here? And what is the significance of that? To answer those questions, you have to ask the epistemological or philosophical question. What does he mean, the Black worker? Is it only the historically constituted group of people, or is it also a category of knowing? Does that make sense, Sheldon? That makes sense.
Say it one more time.
Okay.
Quick question. Would it be like, this is a gross simplification, but would part of it just being viewing America through the lens of the Black worker?
Well, true. See, but that's it. But once you say lens, from a philosophical point, you're talking about categories of knowing. That's what a category of knowledge is. It's a lens. What separates Du Bois, let us say, from Foner? Foner is humdrum, what you expect from historians. Nothing different, nothing extraordinary, in many ways mediocre, you know. But what separates Du Bois? It is that it is not humdrum, it is not ordinary, it is not what you expect. You dig what? Does that make sense? It does the unexpected. Why? And this is the great question. It's so exciting.
Yeah, it is.
You know, it's like,
It is.
yeah. It's like the book itself has its own biography,
Yeah.
its own story. The book itself, and to tell the story of the book, you have to unlock, you know, so much of what Du Bois is doing. He's not opaque. He's very transparent. But you got to know how to read it. You know, the truth right out in front of you, but you don't know how to see it. It's like was it not the metaphor of the cave, the allegory of the cave? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Everybody in the cave, you know, can't see. One cat go out, he's got one, but he can see. Come back and say, well, look at here, dog, you know, yada, yada, yada. They said, man, get the fuck out of here, man. You crazy. But it is, I think Du Bois is so transparent and honest with the way he writes this. So indeed, why, the first question I'm just forced to ask, why did he start here? And why has no one before or since him begun there? There, you got to go dead to philosophy and theory of knowledge.
Let me add, you asked a good question.
Well, wait a minute. Let's not distract now. We want to stay on this one.
I'm talking about
okay, go ahead.
epistemology. No, there's a distinction between social epistemology, which is what you're talking, and epistemology. What I mean by that is, and Tony was talking about Descartes, right? Well, when Descartes, when he was talking about how we can know the world through experience or through reason. And social epistemology, what Tony is talking about, what we're talking about.
That's not what I'm talking about. I ain't talking about social epistemology yet.
Yeah, well,
I'm talking about categories of knowledge. I'm talking about something closer to Kant.
Well, Kant, okay, well, you talk about Kant. Kant was talking about epistemology and how we can know the world. In other words, he had categories.
That's right.
In other words, he talked about space and time. In other words, space and time is something that's already in us. It's not. It's in us.
But Dwight, I don't want to interrupt you, but I want to stay on this.
Okay, well,
See,
on that.
I mean, we could.
Okay,
see,
no.
And I mean, and I know, and
this is debate.
yeah, right. See, I don't want to get off.
Everybody.
Yeah. No, see, the thing is, let's stay with this right now.
All right, I'll shut up.
You dig what I'm saying?
Okay.
No, I dig where you're coming
No,
from.
because I just wanted them to social epistemology.
Yeah.
There's in the field of philosophy, there's a
Yeah.
distinction that
Well,
can be made.
I could see, but see, the thing is, and I wouldn't be opposed to you applying social epistemological, as they say, sensibilities to this.
Right.
See, I'm of the opinion. See, Du Bois comes dead out of the Enlightenment. He knows the rationalist tradition. He knows Kant. He knows Hegel. I think he knows Kant better than Hegel, by the way. You have to factor that in to the way he does this. And see, I guess the reason I was raising my voice, which I apologize for, how could thousands of academics who claim to know this work not see it? How could you not see it? How could you not ask the very simple question? Why does he begin with no one who wrote before him or after has begun? Why? What are the consequences of that? And I think they are profound from all of the angles that we talk about. That's the way. Go ahead.
Just trying to make sense of the category of knowledge. Could we also say that he presents the white proletariat and the planter as a category of knowledge, a way put you in their lens, although in a less profound way, and helps you
This is a very good.
make sense of this, great travesty / revolutionary period through the primary lens of the Black worker.
This is so interesting. What about the other categories in the work? Are they equivalent? You see what I'm saying? There is a non-equivalency here in Du Bois's writing. The Black worker is foundational
It is.
to all of American history. The white poor, the white worker are critical, but not in the same foundational sense as the Black worker. Now, that's Du Bois. We don't all have to agree with it. I agree with it. I think it explains the 21st century as much as the 19th and 20th century. You feel I'm coming? But it is so damn challenging. It is so damn challenging. And I mean, just frankly, exciting intellectually to ask these questions about this text. Because, hey, Eddie, if you check it out going through the book, the principal category, the foundational category is the Black proletariat. That is the principal category. And if that is the case, what? Oh, well, I just said, but you see what I'm saying?
What were you gonna say?
No, I don't know what I don't. See, I think the fundamental weakness of almost every interpretation of this book, well, Horn, I just dismiss. I don't think he even wants to know it. Take David Levering Lewis,
Right.
Du Bois's biographer.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I don't think he understands
Mm.
what the hell is going on in Black Reconstruction. I listened to Henry Louis Gates. I listened to podcasts, Henry Louis Gates and Eric Foner, and then they bring Cornel West in. They give the most mundane, trivializing interpretations of the book possible.
Mm.
You know what I'm saying? There's nothing exceptional about this. The only thing exceptional is written by a Black guy.
Mhm.
And we didn't think Black people could write 800 pages of history. That's, and so since it's Black History Month, we'll say Black Reconstruction. I hate to put it that way, but when I listen to Henry Louis Gates and Eric Foner podcast, yeah, really.
Oh.
And I'm saying, no, it's more than that. It's more than that. Yeah, but no, you were going to say something.
Well, just that, I think, actually what you said at the beginning of free school, like the rigorous open-mindedness, I think is
Yes.
important,
Mm.
especially with Du Bois, because I think with Henry Louis Gates and Eric Foner, if you were to actually like wholeheartedly try to understand Du Bois, you would get so much more out of him. But something that they said in that podcast was like, if someone asked, if Du Bois were alive, like what would he be focusing on today?
Yeah.
And I think they said like, he would be like concerned with the wealth gap between like rich Black people and poor Black people. And like he would be doing like sociology to like try to think about affirmative action or like something like that.
Or reparation.
Yeah, and so I feel like in a lot of ways, like with the event panel title, like Reclaiming Du Bois for Our Times, I think there is, whether it's from like sincerely just like misunderstanding or not comprehending Du Bois's categories of knowledge and what he has to offer us, or whether like in the case of Horn, it's much more malicious. I just feel like there is a way of trying to basically pigeonhole Du Bois or like limit him and say that actually, all he did was history, or like all he did was like sociology, and it was like incredible for Black people at that time.
Yeah, right.
But that's it.
At that time.
Right.
But at that time.
Yeah. So I think also one of the main points that he repeats throughout Black Reconstruction is that like he says, I'm starting from the assumption that Black people are human beings. And that despite all the history that has been written about them during the Reconstruction era, to say that they are not human beings and that they were not capable, I believe that they could. And like that's sort of the lens through which like all of this is happening. And once you like recognize that, there's so much more that you can see. And I just think it's ironic that people are doing that same thing to Du Bois, of like not actually like having faith or even like listening to what he's trying to do.
This conversation reminds me of.
Well, let me let Pulver and then.
Sorry. No, I just had a question because I wanted to ask whether you think that these people, who we've been talking about, who comment on Black Reconstruction, is it more a lack of understanding of the purpose of this work or a deliberate obscuring of the purpose of this work? Because it almost seems like what Du Bois was trying to do here is to talk of a promise, a potentiality of what the Black worker could be and what it could mean for the American democratic project and even the American identity, so to speak. And I mean, I could totally see even more than a lack of understanding, a deliberate, effort to not look at it that way, because it involves certain, it involves a certain restructuring of the relationships between the various classes in American society right now. So,
Black Reconstruction was published in 1935, the first publication in June of 1935. And we're coming up on its, let's see, 2025 would be its 80th
No,
birthday.
it's 90th.
Hmm?
90th.
90th year, its 90th birthday.
Mhm.
So if it's 90 years old, I would say for 75 or 80 of those years, it was taken out of libraries, it was seldom in bookstores, taught nowhere, not seen as a foundational text in American history, and so on. And that was the Cold War. Du Bois had to be silenced,
Right.
and his greatest work had to be kept out of the public sphere. Now, of course, people knew of it and had read it. People like Martin Luther King, you see it so apparent.
Wow.
But scholars had not embraced it. Dwight and I went to a black college. I don't think the work was ever mentioned, let alone Du Bois. It
Wow.
was the Cold War.
Wow.
Oh.
Well, what
Uh,
year were you there?
A long time ago. Just put it that
That's
way.
for my historical understanding.
This is the 60s, the 60s. And even with the introduction of Black studies and the Panthers and all of that, they talked about Du Bois, that Du Bois had to be a part of the curriculum, but there had not yet been enough time to fully incorporate it into the discourse. So what you found is that young radicals of that period gravitated towards like Frantz Fanon's Wretched of the Earth,
Right.
Mao Zedong's On Practice,
Right.
you know what I'm saying? But Du Bois was just too complicated for young people. We had no way. How do you approach a book like this? How, even Souls of Black Folk, his language, is so different. But Frantz Fanon is more easily understood. Mao Zedong, of course, more easily understood. But then the ruling class, it was a dark night when it came to Du Bois. He was seen as the greatest enemy of the state. You could have professors, so-called radical professors in universities teaching Karl Marx, but not Du Bois. It is a story that is, it's just unbelievable. How one figure was so humiliated and disgraced by the ruling class. And so many people, and this is where the lack of knowledge, yes, at that period, we just didn't know. We just didn't know how to know the work. But then after the Cold War, and this is when you get David Levering Lewis's 2-volume biography, only after the collapse of communism does it become permissible to even talk about Du Bois. He was not, you just can't believe it. But then, now that we can, quote, talk about Du Bois, we talk about him in such a trivializing and distorting way that it's almost as bad as not talking about him. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so now I think the distortion of Du Bois is more intentional. And Nuri, tell me what you felt about this. I watched the Henry Louis Gates, Eric Foner, and there's something that I felt in Eric Foner's body language and tone that's something he's ashamed of. He feels a certain way. Now, his book is published in 1987. This is when Gorbachev is coming out with all that stuff that he was doing, and the Soviet Union would go out of existence in 4 years hence from the time of the publication. So democracy, liberal, that's Foner. And how could you say I'm a mere liberal because I come from a left family? Like that meant something. But I picked up that he was not completely confident or sure of himself in talking about Black Reconstruction. Did you pick that up too?
So, no, I think it's interesting because in that interview, he said that maybe he was at the March on Washington or something like that as a pretty young man.
Mhm.
But in the updated preface to his book Reconstruction, which is it was relatively recently.
Yes.
But he writes about actually how he came to know or become familiar with the Reconstruction era. And he says growing up on Long Island, he had to give a presentation on Reconstruction or something. And his father, I think, was a historian or an academic of some sort. And so his high school teacher was basically presenting the Dunning School. And Eric Foner, apparently in high school, he based his presentation off of Black Reconstruction. And then there was a debate, and then his classmates were supposed to vote for who they thought had the better argument. And I think Eric Foner got 1 or 2 votes. And so it's interesting because he explicitly almost gives credit to Du Bois and that was his entry point into Reconstruction.
Yes.
But then when you read his actual book, it's almost like he feels like he has to go beyond Du Bois or overcome Du Bois to make
Or
it
correct Du Bois.
Yeah, to make it maybe more acceptable
Yes.
to the general American readership or something. But in doing so, he has to sort of obscure Du Bois's actual framework and sort of blur it into the grassroots, labor, and then also women's suffrage, and bring in all of these things to basically make it more, I don't know, just I guess more acceptable and also less sharp. But I felt I don't think that Foner actually intended to renounce Du Bois or to intentionally really put him down in that way, just because I think he liked it when he was young. But I feel he is also having a conflict within himself because he basically built a career off of not being Du Bois. And now that it's more trendy to talk about it, he has to, but I don't even know how he sees his position.
Foner, not only his father, who was a union leader and in the left, but his uncle, Philip Foner, who was a great historian. And the fact that Eric Foner grows up in a left-wing family. The left, while maybe not completely understanding Black Reconstruction, celebrated its publication. That's why you get Henry Winston's appropriation of it in a way different than others, let us say.
You should also mention that Phil Foner taught at Lincoln.
Huh?
Phil
Taught at Lincoln, yes. But being in a left family, it would not be unusual for him to do that. But going from junior high school to a tenured professor in history, there are other constraints. I'm not writing as the son or nephew of a well-known radical or people in the Communist Party. Now I have to achieve my own career. And what is so, the reason I found his body language interesting is because he mentions Du Bois once in the entire work. And that's the preface, where he says Du Bois wrote the first, I guess, anti-Dunning or something like that. Once. It is a, quote, critique by silence. It is a contemptuous silence. That is not unintentional.
Right.
Not unintentional. The greatest, now we know, the greatest American historian, let us say one of the greatest, writing on the very topic that you're writing on, mentioned once in the preface. Suppose I'm a left economist a political economist, and I'm going to write on modern capitalism. Let's say capitalism in the 20th century. Would it be enough? Would it be enough to mention Karl Marx's Das Kapital once in the preface?
Right.
That's the key, the work that breaks the mold, the first major ideological challenge to the white supremacist interpretation of Reconstruction. At least that is Black Reconstruction. Not to mention all of the paradigm shifting frameworks. One time, you see, this is what I'm picking up, Nuri. You thought back when you published it and wrote it that you're going to do something slick.
Yeah, no, that you get away with it.
You get away with it. Yeah, there you
No,
go.
it actually is pretty weird because he mentions Carl Schurz and some of
Say
those.
that again.
He mentions Carl Schurz, who Du Bois quotes a lot
Mhm.
as one of the German, I guess labor leaders who emigrated from Germany
Right.
and then became he wrote about his travels and what he saw in the South and stuff. And actually this, I mean, obviously it's the same time period. And I think if you're trying to be left leaning, not white supremacist, you would gravitate towards the same sources. But it's true that there's actually very much an overlap. It almost kind of feels like plagiarism, except it lacks the ideological framework that Du Bois has. But it is I did think that it was kind of strange that I think maybe he mentions Du Bois exactly once, but it's not really in any substantive way of. But I guess in the not actual Reconstruction book now he's oh, Du Bois was one of the greats, or he says it, but yeah, it is very strange.
Because he can't say anything else today.
Yeah.
But at the time, 1987, Du Bois was still blacklisted. I use that, I could use whitelisted, but we use blacklisted. That he was one of those people whose names couldn't be mentioned, just like Paul Robeson. And certainly not in the academy.
So then how does it work where now by association Foner is supposed to also be an ally of Du Bois? How does that even with the interview, with the way that the interview was constructed, I feel Henry Louis Gates and Eric Foner were both supposed to be basically two different experts on Black Reconstruction and Du Bois. But yeah, Foner doesn't actually really have that much to say intellectually about Black Reconstruction.
That's the other interesting thing. He has, I agree, frankly, nothing new to say, nothing interesting to say about Black Reconstruction. Am I right about that? Would you agree with me?
I was listening to the interview on 2.5 times the speed, but nothing interesting stuck out to me.
Nothing interesting. Nothing interesting to say about the work that your work was supposed to supersede, believe me. And how for instance, Cornel West, who for some reason has a certain animus towards Du Bois, and he does. He would always say, I don't know what the kids said, but if you want to understand Reconstruction, read the magisterial work done by Eric Foner. I mean, I'm saying, wait a minute, money? That's all. But you see, I know, so many academics, one of the things about academics, they're speed readers. I mean, you get among academics, have you read this? No, I ain't read that. I can't shit. I'm just trying to finish this one.
Right.
They're but they're very superficial readers. So certainly, if you want, how would you say, Reconstruction for beginners, or they have the other one, Reconstruction for idiots, Foner. But Reconstruction for beginners. If you want the study in its totality, in its depths, in its meanings. Black we can say, but everybody, but here you get the color line
Yeah.
and knowledge. You know, I cannot imagine. I'm not me, but people. I cannot imagine a Black man would write something that would tell us what we need to know about our history.
Yeah.
And don't you dare compare him to Karl Marx.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's like highly upset. I'm talking about Black people too. Oh, how could you say that a Black man that could think on the level of Hegel or no, you're just being a Black essentialist.
Yeah.
That's part of the problem. They saw a Black man and did not see anything else. Oh, it's just a horror. Oh, go ahead.
No, you're correct. Some of you may know that the person who wrote Black Power went to Lincoln, Professor Hamilton. He wrote the book with Stokely Carmichael. We and Tony know him. I speak to him to this day. And you heard of the historian John Hope Franklin?
Yes.
Right. Well, he said to me, this is Hamilton's word, that in his memoirs that I'm talking about white scholars. He said they did not respect Black scholars. And
could I ask you a question? You think Black scholars respect Black scholars?
Well, I'm talking about in that time. I'm talking about in that time.
All right.
I'm talking about. See, I'm talking about in the context of the time.
Oh yeah.
The context of the time. It's only recently that white scholars have respected Black scholars. And when Tony was talking about Du Bois and all that, we did not study Du Bois. He's absolutely correct.
We didn't hear the name.
Matter of fact, there wasn't even Black studies did not exist. We were fighting for Black studies
at a Black college.
At a Black college.
Ain't that an irony?
So in other words, what I'm trying to explain to you, you have to talk about the context of the time to understand now. You understand? And so you're absolutely correct. I agree with they ignored Du Bois because they did not respect.
That's right.
A Black person. And you're absolutely right.
And then a Black person at the government came down.
And if you think about it, I'm going to say this. I'm reading this about South Carolina.
Go ahead.
Well, as you know, when I teach, sometimes my family's been here 400 years. I'm a descendant of a slave. I'm reading here my maternal great grandmother, her father served in the South Carolina State Senate in Reconstruction. So, and his name was Aaron Simmons. So Du Bois is probably giving a better description than any scholar, because at the time, because if he lived it and he traveled to South and he spoke to those people who actually lived it.
Absolutely.
So it is probably true. I would agree that what Tony is talking about here is very important. And once again, with the epistemological thing he was talking about, knowledge through experience. That's what I was getting at, through experience, and through that experience, you have a better insight, that what we call the lived experience. You understand? And so Du Bois lived it, whereas this Eric Foner is talking about it from reading about it. You got it? And so his insights are probably, I'm going to say not probably, but better than Eric Foner.
I agree with you.
So I'm just trying to describe to you.
Very interesting. This is very interesting. But go ahead, Serafina.
No, just the only thing I wanted to mention was the Philadelphia Negro and Du Bois's experience making that work, but then also what he did in doing so. Because that was I remember him writing about researching the 7th Ward and how people responded to him in different ways, why are you looking at
why you studying we're not laboratory, right?
Experiments or whatever, but then also how he didn't really have a lot of money in the project itself. But also with the same impetus of writing really all of his books, needed to do this. study. And I'm just getting to the fact of like sociology, and why even that as a tool could be
Yes.
used because he made it.
Yeah.
And that going back to a couple of things that I guess we're talking about like knowledge and just the stakes of the work that we're looking at, I think is yeah, because
I'm sorry, I don't
no
mean
no
to.
no
I
no
just so
it's no whatever. I'm only mentioning it at that level because like again, I think it was or Jeremiah who mentioned like the human being or seeing the state as a human being and so on and so forth. Why is that important? Well, it's like if you took like if you took Shakespeare, like Michelangelo, you didn't consider them human beings, and we wouldn't have studied or we wouldn't have looked
very
at
interesting.
we
had
what
to
they had
yeah,
made.
I'm sorry, you're right, Sarah.
But then also like in general, like the impetus of the thing. What is the point of freedom if not to advance human, like the human experiment, to the advance ourselves as human beings? So yeah, I just wanted to mention those things.
And, Branson, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was just feeling while thoroughly listening at the conversation about this. I was just feeling that the reality of how they'll take a powerful, insightful, accurate person's perspective or even a life and water down and trivialize the significance of what they said or what they did. Now, just to give you a real quick an example in a totally other direction, but the same kind of way that they did that. This epic film they did on Harriet Tubman, and I knew not to go because I have not been consuming any mainstream media, and I knew, but I wanted to hear an accurate critique of it, and then how could you possibly say she brought 30 people back? How could you say she brought 30 people back? And you Google it, it says 300!
Yeah.
And excuse me, I'm not angry. I speak very, very dramatically. I had to. See,
You make me feel good.
How could you do that? And this is what they did.
Yeah.
And see, what I had to understand was the fact that, I used to think that I could look at the television and I could look at a news broadcast and I critique it and say, oh yeah, why didn't they lying about that? I know they're covering that up. Yeah, you can do that. But here's what the problem is. And once I understood this is why I stopped watching television. Once I understood that all of those images are stored forever, that I can't edit my brain, and that my subconscious mind feeds them back up to me, but this time they're not filtered through my intellect, so they have a power over me that I don't know that they have. You understand? And once I understood that, that's why I stopped. You know what I mean? But that's a perfect example. Anybody can Google it, it comes up 300 people. And they said 30 people in a feature film on Harriet Tubman. So I said, I have to say this. That there's a lot of just trivialization, just totally off the point information put out.
This is so important what you said. You know something, and this is part of what we are dealing with, because just like you say, how much garbage has been embedded in the unconscious minds of the American people. And just like, like Jerry said, or like Sarah said, if you don't accept the humanity of Beethoven or Michelangelo or Shakespeare, you can never accept the significance of their work.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? And that's what I was kind of asking Nuri about when I was looking at Foner. He is invested. Eric Foner, this huge book, his whole career is based on it. He's made a lot of money as a professor because of it, but it's based upon an anti-Du Bois set of assumptions.
Oh, yeah.
Nuri and I, we're trying to read. I don't know how far you've gotten, Nuri. You got 70 pages?
Wow.
It's
I have to read 100 pages a day, and it's not hard.
Are you going to 100 a day?
Yeah, but it's because I want to be done with it.
Like they said, well, go ahead with your bad. So I'll explain that to y'all too. I mean, it's labor not of love. It's a labor. It's a torturous labor.
Moral responsibility.
Yeah, it's a moral. But see, this is the thing. When all of that, because it is television, it is mass media, but it is books too. Because the same people that control the mass, the television, control the publishing industry. And part of our problem, the problem of the progressive forces of how are these deeper assumptions addressed? That's why I was asking Dwight. Cornel West is not white by any means. He's a fighter for Black people. But he cannot see Du Bois as the equal of even the most mediocre white philosopher like Dewey, John Dewey. I would say for Cornell, and I could be wrong, and I have a rigorous open mind, like you said, man. But it's just too much evidence that every reference, your default position is a white thinker, and they're all magisterial. They're all magisterial, but Du Bois don't even show up in your syllabus. Yeah, and so that is the problem. And of which Du Bois knew all of his life, that in terms of knowledge and knowledge production, he was being discriminated against. He was being treated differently. He knew, and he writes about that had he been white, there would have been a completely different reception of his work, even up to this day. And that's why the subtlety, and Ransom, and everybody, I would recommend look at that. It's not a long podcast of Foner and Henry Louis Gates, and it is very apparent that Foner is feeling a certain way about the way that his quote greatest work dismissed Du Bois's great work.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Go ahead, ask the quote. What do you?
That's the one I sent you.
No,
How?
and it was intended to do that, but now, I guess almost 40 years after his work was published, there's a reckoning. Well, if Black Reconstruction is so great, why didn't you cite it? Even if you wanted to debate it.
Question to you. Would you say Jerry Horn, Cornell, who these are people I know,
Right.
and would you say you said that they're anti-Du Bois, or would you say they misinterpret?
No,
well,
this is interesting. Go. Yeah, very interesting point.
Because they would say they're not anti-Du Bois.
No, they wouldn't. You couldn't say it today. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You cannot say you're anti-Du Bois today.
Right.
Like
Exactly.
Foner would not say he's anti-Du Bois.
Exactly.
But it's a kind of contemptuous silence in the work.
So, in other words, I'm trying to say if they were here,
Yeah.
got it, how would they talk back to you?
Good.
Yeah.
If they were here,
I
what would
wish
they
they
say?
were.
And that's very important for when you're thinking about something. You always,
Right.
because you don't want to be one-sided. You know what I'm saying? And how would they respond? No, but how would they respond to Tony or what we're saying here?
Mhm.
And that's what, and so I'm asking.
That's
you
a
know,
very. I mean,
Well, that's
go, go,
why.
go.
Well, that's why I like the way you said you specifically used the phrase "Doc," anti-Du Bois assumptions.
Right.
I really think that's
Right.
because once we start talking about assumptions, we're talking about a worldview. Like in some ways, it's like what's your departure point?
Right.
Like first of all, do you see Black people as human beings?
Right.
Second of all, how are you understanding American history? Was its foundation fascist or was it a revolution? How do you understand the Civil War and Reconstruction? And I think that's why obviously no one can say I'm anti-Du Bois, but the
Right.
key is anti-Du Bois assumptions. Let's talk about those
That's
assumptions.
That's
And I think that's the key.
right. That is. That's,
See,
I think
yeah,
that's-
And then also, I mean,
Right.
within it, it's like, how are you understanding the people, the American people, their motivations, why throughout America's historical development they made certain choices? How are you understanding the capacity of the Black worker
Exactly.
in being able to open up the capacity for like even the white worker? And that's actually why it was really what Eddie said was kind of deep because it made me think a certain way about the primacy of the Black worker as a category. Because in some ways you actually cannot fully understand even the white worker without the Black worker. And even in the Black Proletarian South Carolina, there's 2 pages in this that I was like reading to Doc because I got so excited about it. And what he says is it's this thing about white supremacy where in some ways the white, like even, let's just say white people cannot even understand themselves without Black people. That's what Baldwin says. But Du Bois is making, he's saying in a way where it becomes a knowledge category where you cannot. So now we're not just talking the way Baldwin is, but it's a knowledge category. You cannot understand the white worker without the Black worker. You have to see the white workers through the Black worker, and you cannot understand the white planter without the Black. I don't know. So I feel like this is an interesting.
Well, that's where the conversation goes, right?
Yeah,
You see what I'm saying?
Right.
I agree with that.
Yeah, I agree.
See, a person could say anything out their mouth. Oh, I'm pro Du Bois. I like Du Bois. Gerald Horn would not say he doesn't like, but then you read what he writes.
Yes.
That's what I mean.
I mean, totally conflicting assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
But go ahead, Jerry. Oh God, no, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jerry.
Well, I think part of it is that we are responding to just like the assertions that have already been made by people like Gerald Horn, and it's like when you take the things that someone says in public at face value, like take the arguments that they are making, which is like someone like Gerald Horn. It's not like we're going out of our way to critique this guy. I think part of it is that we observe certain phenomena in terms of like first of all the arguments that he makes in like the Nation magazine or in other places on podcasts and all that stuff. And part of it is that we see that this is having an impact on especially the younger generation. And it's like when you actually try to dissect like what kinds of arguments he is making, I think part of it's not even I don't think it's a misinterpretation of Du Bois so much as it is they are uncomfortable with the assertions that Du Bois makes. They're not able to actually stomach it and deal with it because it troubles their own pre-existing assumptions about like what America is, about what are the possibilities today. Like it troubles all of their like basically their agenda, their assumptions. And so because they're not actually able to like sit and like actually just absorb what Du Bois is saying like throughout this work and just throughout his like body of work, it's like and then instead they have to if they talk about Du Bois at all, they have to make the most insignificant critiques or the most insignificant observations because they're not actually able to sit with and deal with the actual substance of like the many different layers of arguments that Du Bois is making. So I don't think it's just about misinterpretation so much as it is like they're not able to actually deal with Du Bois and his totality. And like they're trying to induce a younger generation of people to take that same approach where you're not actually able to, it's not even just about the boys, you're not able to deal with the American situation in its substance and in its totality. And instead, you're going to resort to these like the most superficial ways of trying to understand like what's happening in America, like what are the possibilities in America today, all of that stuff. And yeah, I feel like it's not so much as interpretation as like they're just not able to deal with Du Bois. Because like it does take a lot of work. Like we're spending like 4 hours every Saturday like talking and like trying to peel back all the layers. But yeah.
Go ahead, Al.
I think Emily was sort of touching upon this as well for the chapter on South Carolina, specifically the Black proletariat in South Carolina. I think that's a really significant chapter because it also points to what Du Bois is setting up, which is the key difference with individuals such as Foner and I guess others that have mentioned. And I think Du Bois is also really transparent with this, which is that his assumption in talking about Reconstruction is that amongst the poor and the downtrodden, and this is both Black and white, that's where civilization is. And that's very much at odds with what is placed by others in terms of recounting Reconstruction. Instead, it's saying that actually the poor, white, or anything in American history that has happened so far is counter-revolutionary, or it doesn't matter, or it's actually not what you think it is. And therefore, if someone is saying that about American history and the American people, but Du Bois's assumption and Du Bois's perspective is the exact opposite, then you can make a conclusion, like a logical conclusion, that they disagree with Du Bois. And it's like, how can this man believe that in America there is something so significant and a possibility so significant? And I think that's also why we spend so much time on it, is because of this fundamental distinction, which is that we think that what Du Bois is saying is very significant, not just in Reconstruction, but also for our times. That amongst the poor and the downtrodden, both Black and white, is where civilization is. But individuals like Foner, individuals like, I guess Cornell West, I'm not entirely sure, I'm relying on my comrades here, is that actually no, there is no like anything worthy that we can build upon. And that does influence, like Jeremiah is saying, like a generation of Americans that are growing up in this country. What does it say about their future if there's nothing to build on? And it's also the ideology now that's so popular. And we're trying to, I guess, in talking about narratives, and trying to propose or put forward and reclaim a different narrative that's central to Du Bois.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know if we're gonna go to the South Carolina chapter.
Yeah, well, could we start with the footnote?
Oh wait, can I actually read something from the? It's one page, right?
Please do.
Yeah, and it's the reason why is because actually Nuri referenced this earlier, which is what is the assumption that Du Bois is working on, and I think South Carolina, or this introduction, is very much tied to what Du Bois continues to build upon in the South Carolina chapter. But Du Bois says, this is Atlanta, December 1934, and he says to the reader, the story, this is like, there's no page. No, it's in the very beginning. This is the very beginning. Before the Black worker. So he says, the story of transplanting millions of Africans to a new world and of their bondage for 4 centuries is a fascinating one. Particularly interesting for students of human culture is the sudden freeing of these Black folk in the 19th century and the attempt through them to reconstruct the basis of American democracy from 1860 to 1880. This book seeks to tell and interpret those 20 years of fateful history with a special reference to the efforts and experiences of the Negroes themselves. I'm going to skip the chapter where he says, actually, I can go through it. For the opportunity of making this study, I have to thank the trustees of the Rosenwald Fund, who made me a grant covering 2 years, the directors of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, who allowed me time for the writing, the president of Atlanta University, who gave me help and asylum during the completion of the work, and the trustees of the Carnegie Fund, who contributed toward the finishing of the manuscript. I need hardly add that none of these persons are in any way responsible for the views herein expressed. It would be only fair to the reader to say frankly in advance that the attitude of any person toward this story will be distinctly influenced by his theories of the Negro race. If he believes that the Negro in America, and in general, is an average and ordinary human being who, under a given environment, develops like other human beings, then he will read this story and judge it by the facts adduced. If, however, he regards the Negro as a distinctly inferior creation who can never successfully take part in modern civilization and whose emancipation and enfranchisement were gestures against nature, then he will need something more than the sort of facts that I have set down. But this latter person I'm not trying to convince. I'm simply pointing out these two points of view so obvious to Americans, and then without further ado, I'm assuming the truth of the first. In fine, I'm going to tell this story as though Negroes were ordinary human beings, realizing that this attitude will from the first seriously curtail my audience.
Yeah.
That's right. Very good.
You want
But-
to say anything about
No,
that?
but I think I say that to one, the context in which Du Bois is operating within, as you said, as we've been talking about earlier, which is that this is counter to the narrative of the times.
Yeah.
And essentially what Du
Right.
Bois is saying is that the narrative of the times in talking about Reconstruction is that Black people were not ordinary human beings.
Right.
And so throughout this entire work of Black Reconstruction, that is the constant theme throughout, which is, are Black people ordinary human beings? And actually in their freedom and in their like release from slavery as ordinary human beings, doesn't that mean that they're able to add to civilization? Like what happens to people who are free? And he's trying to talk about this account where they're striving, they're trying, people who were once enslaved are striving to be ordinary human beings, to have, to be able to talk to one another, to build government. And that leads, I guess, I thought about this introduction that Du Bois writes because in South Carolina, that's what he recounts. How are the people organizing themselves? What are they thinking? And what emerges out of that?
Right. And it's so true because I said in my family, you can look it up. Aaron Simmons, he was at the Reconstruction. He was part of the South Carolina state, a representative of the state senate, and of course the rise of the Klan took them out. I mean, that's the history. But yes, this is I'm verifying through my own family history of what he's saying here.
Yeah.
About human beings, they own land.
That's right.
I don't. My family. I don't come from sharecroppers. They had land. So on both sides. So what he's saying is, it's true. It's not false. And the defense. But as well, all of you are pointing out actually that a lot of the people really are not studying Du Bois as hard as you guys are. And that's for sure. And so you're bringing out some ideas that are enlightening and I think need to be written about.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So if no one minds, maybe we could start the chapter. Could I ask maybe that we begin with the footnote in the bottom of the first page? As you can see, if you look at the chapter, he says, the Black proletariat asterisk in South Carolina. And the asterisk, this is very interesting. The asterisk is the footnote here. Now, normally, you would not have a footnote or even an asterisk in the title of a chapter. So I guess I would say it's almost his kind of eccentricity, but it's like he's speaking to the reader because, first of all, the concept of a black proletariat, well, we already talked about how that flips everything. But then let's go to the asterisk, the footnote. Would you like to read it, Alice? Since you've been reading.
Hey.
Kathy.
You looked me dead in the eye and I was like, I was ready to do it. All right, go ahead, Alice.
But you guys don't look alike, man. I mean, does everybody see the footnote that we're talking about here?
Oh, you got it even better.
The record of the Negro worker during Reconstruction presents an opportunity to study inductively the Marxian theory of the state. I first called this chapter, quote, "The Dictatorship of the Black Proletariat in South Carolina," end quote. But it has been brought to my attention that this would not be correct, since universal suffrage does not lead to a real dictatorship until workers use their votes consciously to rid themselves of the dominion of private capital. There were signs of such an object among South Carolina Negroes, but it was always coupled with the idea of that day that the only real escape for labor was himself to own capital.
Okay. Whew. Let's, something has to be said about this. Because in spite of his qualifying the concept of the dictatorship of the proletariat, he used it previously in The Price of Disaster without qualification, and he will use it continually going forward without qualification. Okay? Now, first of all, he does not qualify the first sentence here. He says, the record of the Negro worker during Reconstruction presents an opportunity to study inductively the Marxian theory of the state. Now, when he says to study inductively, he means to study factually, not just in theory. You know what I'm saying? Now, it is also true that there have, to my knowledge, been no inductive studies at this point, up to this point, maybe since, of the idea of the Marxian theory of the dictatorship of the proletariat. It had not been done, even by people who were Marxist-Leninist theoreticians, hadn't been done. So he sees this as an opportunity to inductively study it, okay? And he makes it clear he's not beating around the Marxian theory of the dictatorship of the proletariat. Now, we all know from our reading of Russia and America that he praises the concept and the actuality of the dictatorship of the proletariat. Now, he says that he first wanted to call the chapter The Dictatorship of the Black Proletariat in South Carolina, which it really is, even though it's not called that. He just called it the Black Proletariat, so he took out the dictatorship of the Black Proletariat. But we'll come back. But he says there are people who would disagree with that because, and this is he's drawing attention, frankly, to a discussion within Marxist theory of, and it has to do with theories of the Russian Revolution. and it's, two ideas going on here. Does the overthrow of the previous state have to be by force? There is a famous essay by Frederick Engels called The Role of Force in History. And this idea, which I think maybe Mao took up with his idea of all power comes out of the barrel of a gun, there was nothing but a kind of a military form of seizing state power. How could I put that again? Take the United States, and do I have to tell you this? Take the 60s and 70s. In the 70s with the National Liberation Movement, with the Chinese Revolution and all of that, a lot of young Black and white people began to call themselves Maoists and Marxist-Leninists, Mao Zedong fought. And one of the key things, and also why they disagreed so passionately with Martin Luther King, one of the key things was that revolution is the seizure of state power by the working class. And the only way that state power can be seized is through force and arms, because the state is the concentration at the end of the day of the forces of legitimate force and coercion. That's what Marxism defines the state as. Here is the problem that he will address going forward. And this was the case with the collapse of the dynastic state in China and the collapse of the Tsarist state in Russia. Because, in Russia, the Tsars abdicated and left. So between February and October 1917, you didn't have a really consolidated state. And part of Lenin's thing was, and that's why the Russian Revolution is Lenin, is that into the vacuum, a party representing the proletariat should seize the state, although there was not a whole lot of opposition to it because the state had collapsed. The same thing with the Qing dynasty collapse, 1911? The state collapsed. So you don't have to fight your way to state power. There's no state to oppose you. It was the same thing in the South.
Yeah.
The state, the Confederate state, the planter state collapsed. So if that is the case, even though there would be skirmishes, and even in South Carolina, there was literally a second civil war to take the vote away from Black people. But in the absence of a state, who will seize power? Du Bois said two things were happening. One, the Union Army occupying the South would constitute the defense of the civil rights and the right to vote of the former slaves, okay, against, terrorist, irredentist groups like the KKK, White Citizens Council, and others. The other thing is the question, and this is a big question even for today, the democratic path to the seizure of state power. Let me put it this way. The seizure of power in ways that do not see as necessary or imperative an armed seizure of power, a military seizure of power.
Yeah.
Now let's just assume you could take with the Russian Revolution. By the way, This is why you went through that long period from 1911 to 1949 in China. The Civil War was over what side would constitute the force that would constitute the state. That's why when Mao takes power, we declare the People's Republic of China. Throw back to Sun Yat-sen, People's Republic, but under the conditions of having defeated the Kuomintang, who wanted to set up a different kind of state. In the Russian Revolution, from February 1917 to October, there was effectively no state. There was a government, but not a state. For Lenin, and this was from the time he came back to Russia in April 1917, his whole focus, the Bolsheviks must take state power. Simpson, they didn't have no army, they didn't have no military. In fact, the Russian army was demoralized from fighting in World War I, yada, 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 yada. They literally walked in. And then they had to build the state after that. It was not seizing in the sense of overthrowing a previous state because the previous state ceased to exist. This is the same, it's an analogous situation in the South. The Confederacy had been defeated. You still had Confederates with arms who could try to impose their will in these states. But as long as the Union Army, the victorious army, which included, which is not tens of thousands of blacks who were the decisive force in defeating the Confederacy. So you had the Union Army, which was not a white army, but it was a black and white army with the most disciplined and passionate elements of the army being the blacks. They had everything to fight for, and they saw it as a victory for them. They really did. So they had this enthusiasm about freedom, about, yada, yada, yada. So the question becomes, how do you constitute the state? And what would that constituting of the state look like, and how do you define it? And what he defined it as is as a dictatorship of the black proletariat in South Carolina, Louisiana, and Mississippi. He didn't say in every state. There could have been variations upon that in Florida, Georgia. But in those three states, you had black majorities. A Union Army with armed black soldiers, a organized and organizing black population, which would vote in a certain way, that is, for freedom, for civil rights, yada, 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 for land and for education. And what he asks is not from a dogmatic up here, but from on the ground. What would this in essence constitute? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Now, me and Emily, I think me and Alice were talking about this. Did it ever crystallize as such? No. Right? It did not. But he is saying that is what it had to become in order for democracy in this radical sense. And he has this sense, as goes the South, so goes the nation. That's King too. But within that, he says, as goes South Carolina, Mississippi, and Louisiana, so goes the South. Charlene and Dave, I don't know whether this makes a lot of sense. This is like, we could call it the geography of American history. It is the opposite of everything that you read. But he said, as goes the South, so goes the nation. As goes Mississippi, South Carolina, and Louisiana, so goes the South. But what is the engine of progress in the South? The Black proletariat. If the South is to go forward, there must emerge a dictatorship of the Black proletariat, which for Du Bois represents the highest stage of development of people's power. Now, this is very much in keeping with Lenin, that the proletariat cannot be free in the last instance unless it can establish its dictatorship over opposing classes and forces. Does that make sense? So, does that make sense? I mean, does that make sense? So you see a cat working in an area non-explored. But this one of the things about Du Bois' scientific approach, this high level of imagination. Branson, like you said, when that mind is clear, when it's not a lot of bullshit that's holding you back, you can imagine a way of situating a historical, philosophical problem. And I hope that makes sense. It did not crystallize, but what he is saying, had it crystallized, and the possibilities for it to crystallize were there. In other words, freedom meant the dictatorship of the Black proletariat. Now, dictatorship, the word has a terrible resonance in the American mind, but that's no reason not to use it, because we're talking about science. We're not talking about a popularity. This is not Miss America.
Wow.
You know what I'm saying? Nobody trying to be cute. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, I won't even say that. See, if I'm a social democrat or liberal, I won't use that.
Right. Yeah.
Because I'm nothing but I would use, I say punk rather than the other P word. They're so cowardice.
Yeah.
But science is not a domain of cowards. You understand?
Yeah.
You go where logic and evidence takes you. So Du Bois is saying, now this is 75 years after Reconstruction, or the Civil War, something like this. Yeah, 75 years after the beginning of the Civil War, published. He's looking back. What does that period say to the period he's writing in, or even our period? He is saying, and that's why he will always analogize it to the French Revolution and the Haitian Revolution. What did Dessalines and Toussaint and them establish? A dictatorship. What was established in the French Revolution? A dictatorship that was overthrown. That's when you get all the radicals. Robespierre and the Jacobins, what they call the far left of the French, the hard revolutionaries, the communists within the French Revolution, they pushed the hardest to establish a dictatorship. I think they would call it the directorate, but a dictatorship that was grounded in what was the parliament. And so you see Du Bois, when he's talking in the chapter, The Price of Disaster, and he's talking about Thaddeus Stevens and Charles Sumner and the debate over civil rights, and the right to vote and schools and all that against the guy that was the president, Andrew Johnson. Well, it's almost as though he's reading the French Revolution. You know what I'm saying? And he's saying that, dig, the French revolutionaries, especially the Jacobins and the communists in the revolutionary movement, called for a directorate, a dictatorship of the democratic forces, not of the proletariat. You see what I'm saying? As the consolidation and crystallization of the victory of democracy over the anti-democratic forces. Every revolution has to, in its own self-defense, establish what is in essence a dictatorship. Now, it can be harsh or it can be mild. But the revolution cannot say, oh, we all got freedom of speech and all y'all cats have been fighting against us, go and load up with your ammunition to overthrow us. And then that's, quote, democracy. No revolution does that. And the only people that do that are counter-revolutionary, like the United States. Chinese win the Chinese Revolution, and they're supposed to disarm and tell Chiang Kai-shek and them cats, come on back in here, you got arms, overthrow us in the name of freedom of speech. That's bullshit. What Du Bois says, that in the name of democracy. Now, this is the theory of it. But in actuality, history does not follow theory. Can I just say one small thing apropos India and nonviolence? And this is a discussion we had with James Lawson, and he was very knowledgeable of what the question was. Could the nonviolent movement lead to the seizure of power? Yeah. Oh, it's on a. We got it on a podcast. It would be worth looking at.
That's on YouTube. Yeah.
It's on our YouTube. It's very interesting because he knew exactly what the issue was, and he said, I think he said, if I recall, we have not. The non-violent people who believe in a non-violent struggle have not worked that out.
The state.
Wow.
I'm sorry, Paul. And
No. Yeah.
And it's the Chinese Revolution had, the Russian Revolution had. You know what I'm saying? What do you do after you've defeated the enemy, the opposition class? Because what kept them in, but just like here, what keeps this small group of people in power is their control of all of the instruments of power, the state, the economy, yada, yada, yada. But suppose they collapse, then what? How do you reconstitute the state?
Yeah.
This is what and so when he said, it's like him saying it's a test of, this was a way to inductively study, or what we would call a testable hypothesis. I'm sorry, go ahead, Samir.
I also kind of remember the phrase he used. He said something along,
James Lawson.
Yeah, he said something along the lines of the practitioners of nonviolence have not yet come up with a theory for the seizure of state power.
He said almost something like that.
Like
yeah.
Further research is needed. Someone needs to do this.
Yes. Jerry?
Well, yeah, I think this is why I feel like part of the problem is because you're following like the blueprint of the Russian and Chinese Revolution in some ways, that it's like if you follow the logic of Du Bois, it's not even so much. I feel like you kind of get misled by like even like the phrasing of like the seizure of state power.
Yes, that's
and
true.
It's more
That's
that,
true.
Like if you interpret Reconstruction and in particular the general strike as essentially like an act of non-cooperation with and basically like not that there wasn't violence because it was civil war, but that if you interpret the general strike as like an act of like self-activity of non-cooperation with specifically the planter state, like the slave state, then it's almost like Du Bois is suggesting, and you can also see this with the civil rights movement, that in times of like strategic crisis, that it's not even so much like the working class rushing to seize state power, so much as if there is a grave enough crisis that a kind of mass movement of non-cooperation can still trigger the collapse of the state.
Yes, definitely.
And
that's right. Or
and
crisis of the state. Yes.
Yeah, crisis of the state, and that it's not even so much about like you're all rushing to seize Washington D.C. or something. Because I feel like that's kind of where people get
No, I agree with that.
Yeah.
This is and you know how this is. See, the other thing is part of the assumption of I won't use the word seizing, but assuming state power is the existence of a party, which in the name of this vast proletariat proclaims itself the state. You know what I'm saying? And that's why, you know, going forward all of these years, they talk about, well, China's not a democracy. Well, why you say that, man? It's a one-party state. You dig what I'm saying? Right. The Soviet Union could not be a democracy. It's a one-party state. See, but this is a very interesting historical question. The achievement of power was led by one party in alliance with others. You see what I'm saying? Hence, the historical trajectory of the revolution and of the reconstituting of the state occurs through the mechanism of the Communist Party of China, the Bolshevik Party of Russia, well, we could say the Workers' Party of North Korea. The same thing, bombed to death, nothing left, but the only instrument of the people is the Workers' Party, which has the moral authority to do so. Same thing in when by the time Mao and them declared a People's Republic, there had been the Long March. People knew about who are these superhuman people that did this. So it had moral authority. In the South, you did not have anything comparable. But what you did have, which was not in Russia, is an armed detachment of the freedom movement known as the Blacks in the Union Army. You see what I'm saying? What power they could exercise under the right conditions. You know what I'm saying? And in the emerging process of the Black freedom movement, which then becomes after the end of the Civil War, I would call it that, what would emerge from that? Because Du Bois is talking about education, by which he also means political education. Who would be responsible for this? Out of this, in various states, what would in effect be analogous to the Jacobins in the French Revolution, or Dessalines and Toussaint and them in the Haitian Revolution. So here Du Bois, I might say, he, as a sociologist, he is also dealing with the question of probabilities.
Wow.
You know what I'm saying?
God, that's so cool.
Yeah, don't you think? You know.
Yeah.
Hence inductive.
Huh?
Hence inductive.
Well, yes, and I would say hence inductive, but the probability of certain outcomes, even though they didn't occur.
Right.
A historian, a scientific historian, would be compelled to deal with that possibility as an answer to the crisis produced by both slavery and the Civil War. That makes sense when I put that. That didn't make sense. Yeah. See, in other words, as a scientist, you don't just report the facts. You know, this happened, that happened, you know what I'm saying? And then everybody go to sleep while you're talking, you know. It was incumbent upon him, Du Bois, if there was a possibility, how probable was it that it could have occurred? That's what the cat is doing.
Yeah.
That's what he's doing. And that once you dig it, you can just chill and just read, man. Pour your glass of wine and just you know, okay, well, I know y'all drink whiskey, but y'all do the hard stuff. But I'm just saying, whatever, you know, or ginger beer, I'll go ginger. And just because now, see, once you can understand what he's doing, this is not ordinary history writing. If you want to do that, read Foner or other lesser figures. If you want something scientific that speaks to the ages and speaks to the future, this is what you're looking at. And that's what we keep doing. Is it, see, we don't know that there will be a fourth American Revolution. A lot of people say, oh, you motherfuckers are crazy in the free school. You're sitting around up there on Saturdays and you're talking a lot of trash. A lot of motherfuckers say, excuse me, a lot of people say that. You know what I'm saying? And they push up against us. You know what I'm saying? But there is no way in human, and no way in science that you are not compelled to deal with what is possible and to then say, because there's not just one possibility, there are multiple possibilities, and then you have to assess the probability of those possible outcomes being realized. Be positive, be they, you know, the whole 9 yards, or less than that, or maybe the opposite of that. Let me show you. I want to go back to Gerald Horne. He provides a useful thinker at this moment. You know, a couple years ago, it was Ibram Kendi all over the place. Now it's Gerald Horne. But it's useful in showing every mistake philosophically, methodologically, that a thinker can make. It is just a comedy of errors, his writing, his work. And it's just almost, but, and Jerry, and I was asking Jeremiah about this. There is an interview or conversation that Gerald Horne has with a group of young activist scholars in Boston. And they identify themselves variously as Native American, Afro-Native American, Afro-American, Afro-Latin, you know, everything, you know, everything, well, whatever, I don't know. It's a confusing situation. No. But Jerry, you have to, I don't want to get this because I asked Todd Doherty too. Gerald, check this out. Near the end, because Gerald has a way, and I think Dwight knows him, and I've known him even longer than Dwight. of he comes out with a flourish of facts and all of this, but then it's like a boxer. A lot of boxers can't go beyond the 6th round. They run out of energy. They run out of, it's almost like he hits a point and he runs out of energy. And then it's like you feel him retreating into a corner. In this narrative, see, because if you say settler colonialism, and we Black people are both a colony within a settler colonial state. That's the best that I can make of what they're saying. We are colony, so our struggle is a anti-colonial struggle against a colonial settler state. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So now the analogy, the historic reference is Southern Rhodesia in 1965.
Right.
Yeah. Southern Rhodesia was a British colony that was ruled indirectly by a white minority. Okay? Sounds complicated, but it's very similar to South Africa. Part of the British Commonwealth, but, and therefore it pays it directs itself towards the British Crown and the British government. But the minority the white minority in 1965 declared themselves independent of Britain. It's what they call UDI, Unilateral Declaration of Independence. So I say that to say that this is what Gerald is thinking about. This is his concrete reference, Rhodesia, a settler colony. Doesn't use Israel, and I don't think it fits anything, but he uses Rhodesia. The American Revolution is 200 years before the whites in Rhodesia declared their independence. The American Revolution was a settler colony declaring its independence from Britain in 1776. About 200 years separated in time, but the same thing. And what makes them the same is that they're white people and they're settler colonialists. They don't belong here, and they declare independence in order to offset the independence movement in Southern Rhodesia, which the British were showing signs of wanting to negotiate with. Showing signs. They made no steps to that, but showing signs that they might negotiate with the Black movement. And so the whites declare independence. What Gerald says is the British in 1775, 1772, definitely 1776, was showing signs of wanting to negotiate, showing signs of wanting to abandon slavery. And so the American settlers, white settlers, declare independence in order to hold on to slavery. Okay? Now, okay, let's hold that aside. I don't want to talk more, but we can. Now, going forward to now, the essence of the situation is pretty much the same, according to Horn. Although there are like almost 300 million white people, and probably he would include, well, just say white people. They are a settler colony. They are not, as they were in South Africa, a minority. The white masses are the majority in the United States. They're nonetheless a settler colony, and their state, their government is illegitimate. because it was wrongfully seized from the British
That's right.
and against the Native Americans. Okay. Now, so what do we do now? This is 2023, not 1776. We're not talking about 13 colonies. We're talking about the most powerful state in the world, in a nation with a white majority. Okay. So how do Black people achieve freedom?
Right.
Okay. Well, now he's in the corner. Okay, all of that. He's running down the young boys. Is Dr. Horn. They're getting weak in the knees to be in the presence of this great scholar. You know what I'm saying? I can feel. I understand it, but I'm serious. It's just like it's like a lot of people if they were in the presence of Beyonce. You know what I'm saying? They go, "Oh God, Beyonce!" Oh, especially women.
Right.
So it's the same thing. This is the smartest man. And you got people on the internet that claim that Gerald is the smartest man alive. Yeah. I would dispute it. Dwight liked him a little bit better than Yeah, no, but so now he's in a corner. Okay, you're talking about 1776 and 1965. Everybody see what I'm talking about? American Revolution, which is a counter-revolution, and is comparable to the white minority in Rhodesia in 1965.
Yeah.
Okay, this is neither 1976 or 1965. Now we're in 2022, 2023. What will have to happen to create a circumstance where the settlers, and by the way, Gerald increasingly, if you listen to him, does not refer to white people or as working class, but as settlers, which means they are ill. You see what I'm saying? Okay, 300 million people, the most powerful state on the planet, maybe, if not it's one of the two most powerful states. Okay, at best we 45 million. Okay, let's say you give us half of the Native Americans to go roll with us. And that's not a given anyway.
Right.
You understand?
Right.
That's not, don't count on it.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so let's to be generous, give us half of the Native Americans. Okay, that take us up to give us another 1.5 million. Okay, now the question of the Mexicans. That's why I wrote the book on the counter-revolution in Texas. Because now, if the Mexicans realize the counter-revolution that they went through, they're gonna come over to our side. Don't count on that.
Right.
I mean, really.
Exactly.
Yeah. So okay, give us 1/8 of the Mexicans. I ain't gonna give us no more than okay. Oh, I'm not hating Eddie.
Why not? That's very generous.
Yeah, he's Mexican, man. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah, I know what you said. Okay, so now we up. That give us about another 3 million. Okay, let's give us 5 million. All right. So now, all together, we got 40 million Black people, and don't think that all them are gonna go with your program either now.
Right.
I mean, that ain't no good. But just for the sake of it, we got us. Then we got 1.5 million Native Americans. Most ain't on the reservation, by the way, and they don't play that, so don't come. And then they got their own reparations with casinos.
Right.
So, okay,
Right.
all right.
Right.
Okay. Now, okay. But then, so now we up to about, at best, 46 million. Okay. So how we going to take this country, which means we have to, quote, seize state power from 300 million people. Okay, sound like a suicide mission to me, at best. And ain't too many people gonna sign up for that bullshit. I can tell you right now. Okay. Jerry is my witness.
Many witnesses. Right?
Okay. And anybody else that heard it. And when I heard this, I said, oh shit. You know what he said?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
There would have to be a major catastrophe internationally, including a nuclear war, which would force the settlers to the negotiating table with us. This is when I realized the whole project is founded upon irrationality.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? Oh, but can I just say one small other thing, Jerry? Now, okay, this is not the 1619 project, which is based on his work. You know what I'm saying? The 1619 project is just talking, you know, talking trash, you know. This is a person who thinks he is thinking strategically, saying in effect that a major shock to the global system, including a nuclear war, would create circumstances for the white settler ruling class to come to the table and negotiate whatever freedom for Black people means in his mind. But go ahead, Jerry, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I know where are you. But well, the one thing that was funny about the podcast is he mentioned.
But he did say that, didn't he?
Yeah.
Am I?
No, I know, but he was like, the other thing that I was just so confused by was like, he was saying, oh, there needs to be like an international council involving all the previous colonial powers that were in America during the 1600s.
Yeah.
It was like I was like, why do you need like Spain involved in this?
Yeah.
He was like Spain, England, like Portugal, like
The
whatever.
Netherlands.
And it's like, oh, it's because he literally thinks like all of the white people in America today are still like property basically of like Europe. But they're all like still, because they're descendants of England and Spain and all this stuff. It's like, oh, like they are still basically tied to like all of these European countries. And so that's why he's like, oh yeah, we got to negotiate with like all of these European countries that used to be like involved in the Americas, because like that's
Or the slave trade.
Yeah, the slave trade. Like that's ultimately what this is all about. And I was like, I was at first I was like, I don't understand why does Spain need to be involved in terms of the negotiations about what will happen with the United States. But
it is, you know, I went, okay. Can I just say, just, you know, it is really, when you think about it, and you know, we could, you know, kind of joke about it as we talk about it, but it's very tragic.
Yeah.
It is very, very tragic. And it's a tragic misuse of intellectual talent. That's the only way I could describe it. Oh, well, go ahead, Bois.
What you did was, in philosophy, you did refute. I mean, and he did it by way of what we call an informal fallacy, by analogy. The analogy that you made, comparing, it did not fit.
It didn't fit.
And therefore,
it didn't fit.
I'm talking about, so you're talking about, and therefore the conclusion that he comes up with is false. That's why it's a fallacy.
Can I say, could I just ask one thing? Would you use the word irrational?
Well,
or absurd?
Not irrational.
Okay.
No, not irrational, because he did use. But his analogy, you know, when you make an analogy, it has to, if it's going to come out in an argument, it has to be more things the same than dissimilar.
That's right.
Because once you point out something that's dissimilar, that kind of takes it apart. So what you did was, maybe you didn't know, but yes, I agree with
But
what
can I
you,
say this?
I agree with what you said
And
because
the other
analogy
thing, yeah,
was,
and I wanted to use one other word, non-equivalency. See, the assumption of equivalency. These are non-equivalent. Just like when we were talking, when Gerald says in the Nation article that Du Bois didn't deal with the Native American question. And that really, I know, ticked you off. You said, well, wait a minute, because what he is doing, we're talking about one thing, and then he gonna throw using chopsticks into the, no, let's start, y'all talking about the black proletariat, but why didn't you deal with whether or not they use chopsticks to eat? You understand what I'm saying? But I'm sorry, yeah.
No, I was just pointing out.
It's like, and I say, and it is tragic, it is irrational, and it borders on the absurd. In other words, I'm using the absurd in the existentialist use of the word, that it is without rational or reasonable foundations. It don't make no sense. If you say, and we're trying to prevent nuclear war, and you say the only way the black people are going to be free is, it's, a third world war. Like you say, but you don't have no children.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So it's you can play that. It's a very, but I think it is the outcome of illogic, of an absurd position, an absurdity, and an inability to abandon what you've had wrong. And you're going to get more entrenched. I'm writing my next book. I'm writing a grand narrative from the 10th century up to now. Well, the 10th century and added, the Ottoman Empire, and wait a minute, home, you ain't even got this right yet. You understand? All this grand posturing, all of it to prove an untruth. To prove an untruth and to make something seem, because he's an old head. He comes out, he was in the Communist Party, and he can talk that talk, but what did you learn in the Communist Party? This is absurdity. And then the other thing is the complete abandonment of any notion of class. You have oppressive people and oppressed people. There is no class like in Du Bois. And you know something? There's no way in the world, knowing the logic and substance of his position, that, and I agree with whoever's, they're not just not reading it right, they oppose it at the most fundamental level. I'm sorry.
I just want to mention it's a little bit. Is that
Oh, we have to get ready to go. Okay. Well, let me just ask one quick. Do we have any comments?
We do. I can provide a quick summary.
Oh yeah.
There was before when we were talking about Russia, Ukraine, and stuff. Nathan had a comment about.
Who is that? Made
Nathan Braza
had
a comment about Russia's role and how they see like the current struggle as like a second patriotic war. Then Don DeBar was talking about how he was agreeing with you that Du Bois is not mentioned in any of the kind of intellectual like history of like radicalism, and how the Paris Commune is upheld as like the major example of like a basically like revolutionary government, but no mention is made of Du Bois. And then he also commented on like the difference between deductive versus inductive reasoning, apropos of the footnote, and then he says that that this is and then Nathan has a comment about basically like what are the conditions for the seizure of state power and how this works
This is so
with the Black
important,
Lives Matter and stuff like that. But yeah, and there was other comments on YouTube, I think, about academia has been shaped by capitalism and how that shapes the nature of like the knowledge that is produced in certain times. Yeah.
Well, folks, this has been a wonderful day. So we get ready to go. And next week, we will continue reading the substance of this chapter. Is there anything you think we should know, Emily, going forward? Preparation for next week?
No, well, by next week we will keep giving out flyers for the Black Reconstruction event.
Yeah.
So, but maybe this week we can. Oh yeah, I need to talk to you, Neil, because you're on a round table. I forgot to let you know. But no, not really.
Yes. And I just want to say welcome back, Portable.
Oh, yeah, welcome back.
Welcome back, Amir from Hawaii.
Okay, I think it's time.